Students and professors of Reddit, what moment made you want to rage quit college? I was fairly confident about a final exam I had taken, but when I checked my grade, it was a 56. I spoke to the professor and asked him to take a second look, but he refused and said it was obvious that I just hadn't put in the effort. I finally convinced him to recheck it, and it turned out that only one side of my answer sheet had been scanned. My actual grade was 94. Thankfully, he changed my grade to the correct score, but it was still frustrating. Story 2. I was not a good student by any means, but when my father had cancer, I skipped as many classes as I could to visit him. I met him for the first time after he was diagnosed with late-stage lung cancer. I was 18. Went to one of my professors to explain the situation, and he told that college probably wasn't for me. And rather than let me withdraw from class, he failed me, thus getting me kicked out of school for poor academics. I saw him at a mall once about 2 years later and called him a piece of crap right to his face. I don't think he had any idea who I was. Man, F that guy. Edit. I eventually went back to school around 25 and graduated. Oh, what a douche that professor is. That's the problem, is that there are a lot of good ones and there's some bad ones. And it's like a luck of the draw. You don't know what you're gonna get. Story 3. My advanced foreign language professor dictated that we would not speak English at all during the class, or we would have marks taken away. This was fine until one day a girl started coughing up blood and we all stopped to make sure she was okay and help her out. Professor took marks off because we spoke in English. I'm still effing angry. Edit. There were 13 people in the class. All of us disputed this when we became aware they'd be taken away. We were informed during the next lecture. The lecturer took a voluntary leave of absence. I'm not sure if he's back at the university because I graduated before he could have come back. The language was Japanese. Story 4. Got a failing score on a lab report even though me and the rest of the group thought we did everything in the rubric. We went to our TA's office hours later to ask about the score. She basically reversed all subtracted points because she was taking off points for things we had done correctly. The next year, one of my lab mates got a grading position with that TA. She admitted to him that halfway through the year, she stopped paying attention to the reports and assigned random scores. What the heck? This is a college-level course for our major. You can't do that. Story 5. I helped my girlfriend through this last year. She was wrapping up her thesis after 2 years of research and only had a couple of months until she had to turn it into the committee. Her supervisor expected her to turn in drafts, but would not provide notes outside of, "You need to rewrite this." Those notes even came with the solid bit of gold, "I shouldn't need to tell you how to do this, you're a grad student." She went to the department chair with her draft and the email chain, and the department chair basically took over as her supervisor for the home stretch. But that didn't stop her supervisor from demanding basically a complete rewrite within a week before the due date, threatening to not sign off on it. That professor is now in a bind because he can't find anyone to join his program. Word got around that he's a bag of wieners to work with. He's not getting any research published because he doesn't have any assistants. So hopefully he'll get the sack soon. Story 6. Background. There are 2 colleges in my town, one university and one community college. I chose community college because, well, it was cheap. English 101. Write a 3-page creative piece on why you chose this community college. So, not knowing how to stretch "it's cheaper than university" into 3 pages, I wrote about how I struggled with menial jobs my whole life and wanted a better future for me and my family. I was actually pretty proud of it. Classic overcoming hardship story. Teacher hands it back with a C, says I didn't answer the question. I flipped. I circled the creative writing portion of the assignment sheet and stapled my graded paper to it and gave it to the department head and dean. The teacher was replaced mid-semester due to medical issues. I assume I wasn't the first one to complain about her. F her. Story 7. Just recently bought a $300 loose leaf textbook for math. Now, this isn't any higher level math, it's college algebra. Something everyone at my school has to take. Of course, it's written by my professor. Of course, it changes every year. Took it out of the shrink wrap and saw that the book was 150 pages. Leafed through it and saw that it's literally nothing. There's hardly any information, like 2 practice problems per topic and a glossary. The real information comes from a $100 access code that has more practice problems and actual information needed to complete the class. So now I'm out $300 on an effing paperweight and $450 on one general education class. There's nothing that can be done at this point. I can't get a refund. All I can hope for is pawning it off to some unsuspecting student for likely less than half of what I paid for. Now I'm all angry again. F you, Professor J. I need to go lie down. I feel ya. Unfortunately, I've been in a very similar situation in which halfway through the semester, the professor decided this expensive textbook we got was no longer that necessary. But I was outside of the refund window, so pain. Story 8. I had a professor who had serious mental issues. This guy was just a raging maniac with the scariest explosive temper. The smallest things would set him off. For instance, this one girl had a bunch of papers stacked on her desk, and he asked her what it was, and she politely informed him that she was a TA, and they were tests that she was going to grade later. It's not like she was grading them in class, she was taking notes and being quiet. It just happened to be on her desk. He shouted at her to put it away. He would get angry when anyone asked any questions. He almost threw a chair at someone and yelled profanities. Everyone was scared of him. So myself and another student spoke to the dean under condition of anonymity, since we were still in his class. The dean disclosed our names to him, and our crazy professor started cold calling us, and he gave me a B instead of an A, even though I made an A on every test and quiz because my class participation was abysmal. Nobody wanted to speak in his class anyway. The whole thing was aggravating. There are people at the company I work for who have been fired for less. My brother is a college professor now, and he says the world of academia has its share of arrogant, egotistical losers. But of course, there are also nice ones. Why do you suppose I hurled a chair at your head, Neiman? Oh my gosh, this is giving hard whiplash. Sorry you had to go through that, and absolutely you're right, there are nice ones, but it sucks when the bad ones are the most prominent. Story 9. I was in a 300-level economics course once, and the professor, who was the head of the department, started talking about negative GDP growth. The GDP declines by 2%, he said as he wrote GDP x 98% on the board, causing a girl in the back of the class to raise her hand and ask one of the most stupid questions I think I've ever heard. How do you know to times it by 98%? A bunch of other people in the class chime in, agreeing with her confusion. Because I said it declined by 2%, he stammers out hopelessly. Yeah, I get that, but what does it have to do with the 98%? Another student asks. It seriously derailed the class for 5 to 10 minutes as the professor tried to get to the bottom of their misunderstanding. At the end of it, he looked at me and a couple of other people in the class who were as visibly shaken as he was, asked us if we knew what he was talking about, and moved on after we agreed. Story 10. First day in a particular finance class senior year. Professor. Who here is taking other classes? Pretty much everybody raises a hand. Professor. Who here has a job? Most of the class raises a hand. Professor. Well, that's a mistake because this class will take you at least 50 hours a week just to pass. I thought he was just trying to be a stupid idiot, but then the guy behind me confirmed that the class would indeed take that much time per week every week just to get by, because it was his third time taking the class and he was an otherwise A student. Sorry, I have bills to pay, other classes, and other responsibilities. The time does not exist to put that much time into this class. So I did rage quit after trying desperately to get through the class for a couple of months. Story 11. One time my English teacher asked us what profession we wanted to pursue. When it was my turn, I told her that I wanted to be a physician. I was pretty hood/urban growing up and dressed the part. Was in honors classes, but always was the black sheep. Anyway, she went on, in front of the entire class, to say, well, sometimes we want to do things that aren't really meant for us. No student should ever be told that he or she can't achieve their goals. In the end, it's all good because I'm posting this between seeing patients after finishing my training and specializing in a field I've always wanted to specialize in. If you have a dream, don't stop until you exhaust every last effort, and never stop believing in yourself, ever. Story 12. I had to take this freshman U.S. geography class that was like 300-person lecture. The professor was in his 80s and tenured. He spent multiple lectures going over his evidence that global warming was a liberal hoax and that Al Gore was wrong. And since he was an academic, every slide on his every PowerPoint was cited, and the most recent data he used to back up his climate change denial was from 1995. He also spent an entire lecture on how Costco was a Chinese company using deceptive marketing practices to appear American because it didn't realize that Costco and Costco are completely different companies. I paid to sit in that lecture. Edit. To those of you asking if it was the same class you had, Texas A&M, 2005 or 2006. Story 13. Did the entire group project because the group I was assigned to neglected to, do the work. Handed it in with their student cards also on it because I'd lose marks if I handed it in myself. Bear in mind this project got a first-class mark. These guys did absolutely no work towards it. Most of them didn't even turn up to meetings. Lost marks because we did a post-group work review and one of the groups said I wasn't a team player or something. I was genuinely considering beating the crap out of that guy and curling out a turd on his blood-soaked, twitching body, but decided to just let the pressure drop on him down the line because it wasn't worth getting kicked off the course. Karma will get that guy. Hope an effing anvil fell on his coward little head and broke his face. Alright, well, yeah, it's a bit extreme for a group project, but hope you passed. Hope things are going well and less violent. Story 14. I had a newly hired lecturer who was not long out of university. He was extremely condescending to anyone he perceived to be below his intelligence level, and would try and crowbar the fact that he had a PhD into any lesson or conversation he could. A few of us also had marks we considered suspect compared to his favorites. After a fair few disagreements with him, I dropped out, as did a couple others not long after. I'm still in contact with a couple people in the group. Turns out he was dismissed after the first year. Story 15. In a computer science class last semester, we had this idiot professor. It was taught by 3 lecturers, sections, but this guy was in charge of it all. He seemed like he might have been a nice guy, but he was so condescending. More than once, I went to his office hours and basically got told I was an idiot, and instead of answering my question, he tried to get me to answer it even though I had no idea. I had run tests on my code and he just told me to run more. This is all fine, whatever, he can do that. I quickly learned to go to the TAs instead. My second test I did awful. I talked to one of the graduate level TAs that had been in grad school for 5 years at this point. He knew what he was talking about. He went over my test with me and said that he didn't know why I was marked so badly, and that if I submitted it for a regrade, I'd get probably half of my points back. And this professor was perfectly fine with regrades. He'd given me a point or two back earlier for them taking off for a missed bracket like they said they wouldn't. I submit it, and a week later I get the regrade back with, "Stop complaining just because you did bad." And he refused to even look to regrade it. It made me so mad, and I'm still upset by it. Also, test and coding classes that make you write code by hand, F those. I can't test code with paper. I get the point behind them, but I never get to code right the first time. I always test it a few times and figure it out shortly after. Just F those tests. Story 16. Had a massive medical urgency and was hospitalized for a week. I was unconscious for 2 days. One of those days, 2 of my classes met. Later, I email and then call my 2 professors. The first professor gets the email. Emails me back her slides, her lecture notes, literally everything related to the stuff I missed. She also says that she'll send me the stuff from the next few meetings if I can't make it to them. Second professor? I might as well have used smoke signals. Didn't receive anything back, and he kept marking my missed assignments as zeros because I wasn't in class. I decided to drop all but one class, the one with the professor who responded to my emails. The other professors were mostly disappointed that I wouldn't be able to finish, but were very understanding about the whole situation. The second professor I emailed initially insisted that I would finish his class. I cussed him out in front of his class, went above his head, and he magically now wanted to let me drop the class. I never saw him around campus after that semester. Story 17. I had one professor who basically burned me out in computer science classes. First of all, he would check for plagiarism, comparing each student's assignments to each other, as well as all previous years, to be sure we weren't working together. He took it a step further, though. He also banned Stack Overflow and Google and would check against a lot of their code. The only resource we were allowed was his lectures. That wasn't even the bad part, though. The bad part was his grading style. Every assignment was all or nothing. Either it worked correctly and within specifications, or it was a 0%. Nothing in between. This also applied to tests and quiz. His test would be in the format of a single question with multiple parts, so really multiple questions. The slightest error would mark the whole question wrong, resulting in a 0 on the test. Sometimes the tests were simple things like writing out the code for 4 different sort of algorithms on paper. And yes, if there were any errors on the handwritten paper, it was wrong. I once failed a test for missing a semicolon. Sometimes he would get creative. Our midterm in our OS1 class was a 20-page paper in 6-point font with nothing but rows of zeros and ones for a parity test. For those who don't know, parity is basically a method of detecting errors in computer code. You add up the numbers in a row or column to get an even/odd and compare it to the final value to see if it matches. So 0, 1, 1, 1, 0 is 3. So the parity bit is a 1. If it matches, you're good. If the parity bit is a 0, you know that row has an error. Anyways, these tests each had a single parity error in them, and it was a take-home test. The professor got really sneaky though. anticipating that each student would try and work with others. He made every single test unique. Then, assuming that we would try and write a script to find the error, he made sure to use a non-machine readable font. This test was 15% of our final grade. In another class with this guy, he made us write our assignments in a different programming language every single week, obviously with no instruction on the language. It was just assumed as part of the assignment that we would figure out how to do it. Story 18. I failed a law course because my professor was a grammar Nazi. She failed everyone on their first paper, which counted towards 35% of the class. She told us we all had middle school proficiency and went on a tirade about how tough the real world is. When finals came around, me and a whole bunch of kids couldn't take the pressure and bombed our last paper too. It was my third year of college and I thought about joining the Marines. This was 2004 during the peak of the Iraq War. Then I talked to my parents and powered through with summer courses to graduate my 4-year program. Well, now it's been 13 years and I'm reasonably well off. Also, I don't proofread my own crap, I send it over to others to proofread. The irony. Story 19. I was taking a British literature course and we were reading Heart of Darkness. I was really into Conrad, so I was really excited for the discussion class and came ready with a crap ton of notes. Well, come class day, my professor is sick. So Professor Buttcheese decides to fill in for him without being asked to. Well, she starts the discussion by stating that she tried to read Heart of Darkness once, but couldn't get through of it because, you know how it treated women. It was just horrible to women. If you've ever read Heart of Darkness, well, it mistreats lots of people, particularly native black Africans. The thing is, though, that there are only like 5 females in the entire book, and they are all in positions of power and influence. Gender is basically a non-factor in the novel. It's literally too busy describing Africans as dying and rotting away like overused farm equipment to deal with issues of gender at all. So, Professor Buttcheese was basically full of crap. Made up a fake excuse for not having read a seminal work of fiction by somehow making herself a victim, and hijacked a lecture about a book she never read without even having been asked. So instead of discussing the destructive nature of colonialism of native populations, Buttcheese tried to have us discuss trigger warnings and other books we read where women are mistreated, and it made us very uncomfortable. Story 20. Happened a couple times. Dropped out of college first time around, not because of grades, but was going through some serious depression. Used the mounting debt and financial holds as an excuse. Went back to finish at age 27. Advisors told me I needed 38 credits to finish. Took 19 credits, exactly courses advisors told me to take, that fall and then spring while working full-time. Came back with a few weeks left in spring. They proceeded to tell me I had 25 credits remaining, despite the fact that 38 minus 19 equals 19. I emailed several people up the chain for help. Nothing came of it. Wanted so badly to quit again. Instead, I took 19 summer credits and lots more debt, falling victim to one lazy professor who never checked the work we turned in online, tried to fail me, and claiming the work wasn't turned in. Complained to his superior, proved my on-time submissions throughout the semester, and got an A, but the original professor only relented when my assigned partner, who did zero work, by the way, throughout the semester, went into his office and cried. He even had the audacity to call me and say, "You'd better thank your partner." Urge to quit is rising, but I finished college, all for a degree that isn't worth the paper it's printed on and has helped me neither to advance in nor escape from my crappy job. Yet, although I'm desperately waiting to hear a decision from a second interview I had with another company recently. Oh, that sounds like very trying times, but you know what, good sir? We're all wishing you the best of luck with your new job opportunity. Story 21. I spent a year as a creative writing major. We had to decide whether to focus on poetry or prose. I was doing poetry. In high school, my creative writing teacher turned me on to the challenge and creativity of form poetry, which I grew quickly to love. I loved rhythm, rhyme, and meter and found great pleasure in the restriction forms like villanelles, sonnets, or pantoum placed on me. But college? Oh boy, if you wanted a passing grade, you had to write free form. And if it was narrative, then even better. If I tried to play with form, I was criticized for not breaking free and finding my own voice. If I toyed around with rhyme, it was mocked as childish. And don't even get me started on meters. My passion for poetry was completely and utterly destroyed, and aside from a few songs, I haven't written a poem since. After my professor made it abundantly clear in very few words that I would not find success as a poet in his department, I changed to prose and started taking those classes. And here it was, same crap, different definition. I was criticized for not painting a bright enough picture for the reader. If any bit of your story was telling rather than showing, then it was wrong. If it wasn't verbose and grand without specifics, it was wrong. I even tested this once on a 10-page short story assignment where the unnamed character woke up, opened the curtains, and looked outside. I spent 6 of those pages describing those curtains, while never using the word curtains. In stupid detail, gave no other details on this story, just the dang curtains. Even that they tasted sharp like the forgotten corner of the crowded city street. He selected it as best in the class for the assignment and shared it with everyone. I told him this was specifically meaningless, that there was no substance in what I wrote, just meaningless adjectives and ridiculous metaphors. He told me I didn't know what I was talking about and still had a lot to learn about being a writer, because it was the words I didn't use that told the story. I never wrote like that again, and ended the semester with a low C- average, and have not written prose since. But aside from having all that passion stomped out of me, I still write. I am now a playwright in residence and have had several shows produced, scripts published, and works commissioned. I'm by no means making a living at it, but it's an outlet for my art that has garnered me a lot of admiration and praise for my way with words. I've just recently gotten into podcasting and produced a series called Stories Telling Stories, where I highlight a fake book that exists in pop culture and flesh it out into a more of a complete story. A few examples include Harry Potter and the Half-Black Chick from Family Guy and A Match Made in Space from Back to the Future. If I hadn't discovered the theater, I likely would have rage quit college after those disastrous semesters as a creative writing major. But I didn't let those a-holes keep me down. Story 22. When I switched my major over to business, I was required to take one of those office classes where they teach you about Word, PowerPoint, and Excel. A few weeks into the class, the professor stopped running it and kind of disappeared. The person who ran that department had to come on and let us know they didn't know the professor had stopped running the class, and it continued like this for the rest of the semester. They never fired her, we never got a new teacher, and the head guy told us to just finish the stuff on the syllabus that we could and turn it in, and that our final grade would be determined from the work we had submitted and the stuff we couldn't due to the teacher not being around and would be excused. Since we didn't get any further than Word in that class and needed to combine our knowledge of all three to do our final, I never did one, and wasn't expecting to have to turn one in either. Well, review time came up for that teacher, and I laid into her. I held nothing back and made sure it was known that a whole class had basically been ripped off $700 a piece, not including all the other fees, because this lady just went AWOL on us. So about a week after I submit my review, I go to check my grades, and there's an email from that professor asking for my final. What the F, lady? I already had a passing grade, and the missing final took me down a letter grade, so I was super upset. I had no clue what to do, so I moved on from it, not realizing that 3 to 4 weeks of Word training was the least of my worries. I needed to know Excel. I wouldn't understand how bad I needed that until a few semesters later when I took accounting and finance classes. I was totally lost in those classes. I had to teach myself how to set up Excel and add in formulas. I had to learn how to set up graphs on it. I had to learn how to set up all of the boxes and fields on the pages and so on. Because I had no clue what I was doing and because I was getting frustrated, I decided to do the first few weeks of my accounting class by hand. It was maddening. I would spend 10 to 12 hours plus on a single assignment, and by the time midterms hit, I was spending more time on my homework than I was working my full-time job just for that one class. I eventually taught myself enough to be able to solve the questions they were giving me in the class and bring down my homework times to something a little bit more acceptable. But I was still livid that a lot of these issues could have been solved had that lady in the previous class done her effing job. I was lucky I passed the class, but good grief, did I feel like quitting and just working a second job along with my primary one at that point. I later spoke to a professor that was a customer at my work, and he was bullcrap when I told him about this. He told me to demand my money back and to file complaints against the teacher. I didn't, but only because I felt too much time had passed since it happened to warrant anything being done. Story 23. I actually did sort of rage quit. I was student teaching in my junior year, and a fellow student teacher, a gay man, made several comments to me about a boy in our class, 3rd grade. He began hiding gifts in the boy's desk after school, too. I reported him to my supervisor and was immediately summoned to the department head. I was interrogated, then pressed on my own performance in the classroom. I was struggling and not very good at leadership with the kids. So because my male colleague was a star student teacher and beloved by everyone, The head of the ED department consulted with my supervisor and decided I was lying. They pulled me from my placement at the school, sent me to a new one across the county, and put me on probation. The department head said I was doing it simply because my colleague was gay. They even gathered all the education majors up for a speech on why homophobia is bad. I was so upset because that was never who I was. The experience effed me up pretty badly. I was super upset that no one believed me and that kids could be in danger. I struggled at my new placement and was ostracized by staff and former friends and started having panic attacks. I ended up taking medical leave at the start of the next semester, and I never went back. I ended up going with a much different career that I'm really good at. I recently looked up my former colleague, and disturbingly, he teaches kindergarten now. I hope those kids are safe. Oh, this is so horrible. I mean, not only did they lose their job, but look, have whatever sexual preference you want, right? But the kids, their safety kind of needs to be a priority, and that shouldn't just be written off because the teacher's a star or whatever. Story 24. The other day, one of my classmates told me, "Oh, sorry, I don't remember your name. You have no distinct features. All white men look the same." Now, I'm left-leaning. I'm registered as unenrolled, but I've never voted for a Republican. I've campaigned for Democrats. That said, I attend a very liberal college. One of those prestigious liberal colleges that you see on the news for protesting campus speakers. Yeah, that kind. I know it seems like the conservatives are being crazy when they talk about the suppression of free speech on college campuses, and I'm certainly a proponent of political correctness, tolerance, and political/social awareness. But I agree, the PC call-out culture from the far left has gone too far, and I can't wait to leave college. I've tried to be one of them, and I just can't effing do it. The fact that we've gotten to the point to the oppression Olympics that it's somehow acceptable on this campus to say crappy things to people because I have white male privilege, which I'm aware that I have and was born with. Oh, and let me be clear, this was a white girl who said this to me. If I had told one of my POC classmates that I forgot their name because they all look the same, which, come on, isn't remotely true, I'd be exiled from campus. I'm effing done with college. Oh, and having to take classes that don't matter? I'm done with all of my major requirements, but I have to stick around for another semester because of the residency requirement, and the classes I choose, and am paying for next semester, literally don't matter. College is a ripoff, guys. Edit. Posting my comment from below here so that there's more visibility and so people can have a bit more context of where I'm coming from. My point is that it was bizarre. I'm not claiming reverse racism in this particular case. I'm saying that the far left presence on my campus is so strong that people see no problem with constructing this double standard. As soon as I leave campus, I'm usually the most liberal person in any room. It's the extremism, which has lots of holes and feels very ignorant, that gets me. For example, I believe that there is a lot of systemic racism in this country and that is played out in our institutions. That doesn't mean that we have permission to go around saying, "I hate white people," something I hear a lot around here, or "all white people look the same." Same goes for Brett Weinstein at Evergreen State, who was physically threatened and had to go into hiding for saying that banning white people from campus for a day is racist. I'm not arguing that this case is oppressive to me because it isn't. I know that my white male privilege affords me to be able to shake off those comments because that's real. It's emblematic of a view on campus that two wrongs make a right, which is a weird conception of justice to me. Story 25. I was studying electrical engineering at a Big Ten university, and it was beating the crap out of me. We had a big assignment coming up that would likely determine my grade in the class. I get myself really pumped up and said, "I'm going to completely master this topic," and proceeded to spend a weekend studying the material and doing the assignment. I'm on my way to drop off the homework in the professor's mailbox, and the stapler that's usually there was gone. There's a strict deadline from which the TAs collect the homework from the mailbox. So I say screw it and just write my name and the page number at the top of the 3 sheets I was submitting. The next day, I get an email of the professor saying something like, "Your inability to follow even basic instructions is startling. Out of the 300 students in the lecture, you're the only one who didn't staple your work. I've chosen to give you a 0 on the assignment." I was devastated. Got the homework back the following class, and I actually got everything correct. Heartbreaker, man. But you know what? Don't let those snobs ruin your passion. You're going hard and you're mastering the topics and the assignments. Just keep learning with that kind of passion, and the world will be your oyster. Keep it up. Story 26. Unapologetic loser CS professor here. Most of my rage nowadays comes from my parents, but my "I want to rage quit" moment came just last year. Each spring, I teach 2 sections of our department's Advanced Data Structures and Algorithms course. This is not an easy course, and it requires an understanding of discrete mathematics and countless hours of repetitively practicing the proofs. It's not an exciting course, it's not an easy course, but it's also not a course that we actually require for our undergrad CS students. Every student who walks through my door does so because they think they're the man, and because they were told that it will help them get a job at a big N company. Invariably, as the semester begins to wind down, I'm slowly deluged with complaints from students with lots of excuses as to why they need better grades, why the study requirements for the course are unreasonable, how their dog died back home and they need a break because they were grieving for 6 weeks. Yep, really got that one. And on and on. I can deal with those. The more annoying ones come from the helicopter parents. My little Bobby has never got a grade under a B, so you must be a bad teacher. I'm going to have your job if you don't let my little Susie retake that test, even though the syllabus clearly states that the proctored retakes are only offered for documented medical emergencies. And, I drank too much the night before, that should qualify. Kind of idiots. Those ones get on my nerves. But the rage quit? That was last year. My ADSA sections have a 52% average drop rate, which is the best in the department. Best meaning lowest. I retain more of my students than other faculty teaching the same course. Unfortunately, these courses tend to be overwhelmingly male, and I've had a few instances where all of the young women in the course have been among the half who dropped, leaving an all-male classroom. 2 years ago, spring 2015, that happened in both of my sections. A statistical fluke. When women constitute less than 10% of a course's enrollments and more than 50% drop, there's always a chance that the 50% will include all of the 10%. It's basic math. 2 weeks before the end of my spring 2016 semester last year, a few days after posting updated grades outside of my office, I received notification from my dean that our university's Title IX department had launched an investigation into my teaching methodology, and that they were being asked by a female student to adjust her grades because the course was biased against women. As evidence, they were citing the fact that all of the young women had dropped from both of my sections the previous semester. At first, I wasn't worried. Why would I be? I helped to co-found our university's Women in CS outreach program, which pulls in female CS professionals from the industry to mentor young women in CS and help launch their careers. I established female-only lab hours in our CS department so that young women would have a place to seek help with their coursework without being hit on by classmates or spoken over, and before anyone complains, it's 5 hours a week in one of our departments, 4 open labs, so nobody is being displaced. On top of that, ADSA is a fairly cut and dried course. Either you get the material or you don't. Nothing is arbitrary, and all the questions either have a right or a wrong answer. Oh yeah, and did I mention that I'm a woman? Our department's only CS professor who has championed programs to support young women in CS is accused of misogynistic teaching practices? That can't possibly go anywhere, right? Wrong. The young woman had a solid D in the class. She had turned in all of her work but had utterly failed to master some of the course's core concepts, and I strongly suspect that she lacked the math background needed for the course. Furthermore, she had never asked my TA for help. She'd never visited me during office hours, and she'd never attended any of our open labs. She'd barely skated through the course, and her grade reflected that. The Title IX office put an observer into my lectures and audited my course materials. I was asked to write a response statement to the complaint and to draft a list of proposed actions to correct the course for future students. The results? The observer noted that during 4 lectures, I asked the students 17 questions and only called on the female students for answers twice. That behavior created a male-dominated classroom environment that was hostile to women. The observer made no mention of the fact that the course had 21 men and 2 women enrolled. The investigator also cited 100% female drop rate during my previous semester as unacceptable and went on to blast me for having a female student drop rate exceeding 45% in that course when the numbers were calculated back to the beginning of my teaching career. The investigator also failed to mention that the 45% rate is actually lower than the drop rate for young men in the same course. I was blasted for providing an unacceptable and hostile response statement as it rejected the student's claim of discriminatory behavior. 9 people have read it since then, and nobody can find anything hostile in it. When I asked for clarification, I was basically told that the simple act of rejecting the student's claim was hostile. I was blasted for my list of proposed corrective actions, which contained a single bullet point reading, "My course is fine, the students just needed to study harder." Admittedly, that was a bit snarky. I probably deserved that one. I was required to take training on reducing gender bias and fostering a more inclusive classroom. My courses may now be randomly audited by Title IX observers who expect to see a pattern of improvement in my teaching methods. And the young woman? They completely removed the course from her record. Apparently, they offered to let her retake it with another instructor without penalty, but she rejected that idea. Her GPA has been saved. And that was my rage quit moment. It was also the moment I learned that keeping a bottle of whiskey in the bottom drawer really is a good idea. Not even kidding. Story 27. I actually quit because of this. Was taking classes for computer science in college because I thought that I needed that piece of $20,000 paper to get a decent job in the tech world. First class spent way too long on drag and drop level skills. You know the course. This is a computer. This is a mouse. This is a letter on a keyboard, and let's sing the alphabet while we all slowly stab ourselves 101. I wanted to test out of classes, but no, we need your money. I won't pretend to be a computer expert on anything, but I know how to things. I finally quit showing up when I jumped into an advanced operating systems class and the professor admitted to not using computers professionally since the punch card days. He moved away from computer work, don't remember what he moved to, don't care. I assumed at first I would get to learn some fun things about punch cards through anecdotal stories during class. Nope, guy could barely function his way around Windows XP. Windows 7 was out for at least a year by this point. No Linux, no Unix, nothing I couldn't learn through a How to Not Be a Moron for Dummies book. I started skipping classes, then I just stopped showing up. Professor emailed me and I wanted to reply with a long email about his incompetence, but I decided against it. Went and got certifications and now work in a job I look forward to work every day. No degree, but only had a little bit of fees from college to pay off. Company paid for the certifications too. Life is good. Looking back, I get that I should have just stuck with it and got the degree, but I didn't want to deal with the rage-induced stress that these courses were taking on me. I wanted to legitimately learn something, and I never did learn anything besides side notes on history of different aspects of technology. Nothing applicable. I will probably never have a degree, and that may get looked down upon for some jobs I may want to move into in the future. But I like where I am now, and am one of the few people my age I know that isn't drowning in debt. One of my coworkers has $80,000 in student loans. Granted, he has something like 4 degrees and is in his late 30s, but still having 80 grand in debt and we're in the same general position? No thank you. I will take plebeian status. Story 28. A few semesters ago, I was in an online management class. It had about 400 students in it, and our professor was pretty much non-existent. For our exams, we had to use this software that recorded us through our computer webcam while we were taking it, so they could see if we were cheating or not. I really wanted an A in this class and studied weeks in advance for the final and made a ton of study grades and flashcards on that site Quizlet. It ended up being super hard, and I only made an 80 on it, which put my final grade at an 89.45, B+. And my professor refused to round up unless my grade was an 89.5. A day passes, and I run into someone who was in my class. He sees me and goes, "Hey, me and all my friends got so lucky we haven't done any of the homeworks or practices, quizzes all semester, but thankfully we found all your Quizlet study guides online and used them to cheat and we all made 100s on the final, and I got an A in the class. How'd you do?" My mouth dropped to the ground. I was so livid. I have never been so angry about a class/exam before. I remember calling my dad crying, wanting to go in and tell the professor that they had all cheated, but never did. I remember just sitting here thinking college was such a waste because half the time the students that are making good grades aren't even doing any work. I was furious for 3 or 4 days after. Ah, Quizlet, my saving grace in geology. I was 1 point away from failing. Story 29. Had a statistics professor who made us use corrupt plagiarism software which picked up on any similar words used within the class's submissions. It would pick up on strings of wording such as in conclusion, illustrated by, or any specific terminology which needed to be said in order to answer the questions correctly. The system also didn't recognize any form of referencing. You can imagine how similar 40 submissions of the same 4 textbook questions would be. Important to mention that the questions were very specific and non-subjective. Certain things needed to be said in order to answer correctly. There was no room for interpretation or essay-style writing. After him accusing the entire class of plagiarizing and threatening to call the dean for half the semester, we finally called him out on his bullcrap. He did not have any of it. He called us whiners who have had it too easy in the past and said we were having a female dog fest. The most frustrating class I have ever been in. I got a C- and I am a straight A student. Bye-bye Dean's List. Story 30. I went to one of those small colleges, Morrison University. Think University of Phoenix. And I was doing very well. It was my second chance since my attempts at culinary didn't quite pan out due to reasons. During my second year at this school that had supposedly been in Reno over 100 years, they went bankrupt. Not only that, we got to find out by walking into the building and having the receptionist tell us we didn't have class anymore, since we didn't have a school anymore. They ran away with our money. They sent us our last stipend check as if they hadn't, only for the thing to bounce. They even sent me a dang replacement check, which also bounced. This was FAFSA, by the way. This was supposedly a federal check they took. Of course, and this has been a few years, I've had nothing done about this. Doesn't stop the company that gave those loans from bugging me to repay them. Cold day in hell when that happens, especially thanks to all that followed. They put my bank into the red, and to top it off, they refused to send me an unopened transcript. Colleges wouldn't even take all of our credits if we had it, and I still don't have mine. They just tell me to call these people, who fled with my check. Community college staff at its effing finest. I mean, I had my transcript, but I opened it on accident, having thought it was my owed check. Of course, it wasn't, and it's now a useless piece of paper. Almost useless. On good faith, I got that college to take it, only for lawyers to refuse to help me with my disability case, which was really kicking my butt all throughout this time, but I have grown stubborn in my spite. Unless I dropped out of school. The school said they'd understand and I could come back later, if I paid an early leave fee, which was between $100 and $700. With all the figures they claim I owe for nothing tangible, since I have yet to find a job that will take my story as evidence. More money than I would ever see for classes that were not worth the price. $400 books with outdated or plain wrong information. If not that, filled with enough typos and formatting problems, they'd get an F in the English class of the college that it requires it. If their English department wasn't full of problems, such as our college-level creative writing class, being nothing more than a reading page from our fiction workshop book and writing reports on it. Very little creative writing, and when we did do creative writing, the other students graded it and gave feedback, but not the teacher. Yet still, this was worth hundreds of dollars. I got more grammar advice from websites like Reddit. In response to my comments about random bullcrap, nothing on my actual fictional writing. F college. Edit. To clarify, I've gone to my state's university, very briefly because I ain't made of money, the scam school, and a community college. The bad writing teacher is a story from the community college, and the books are a general judgment of all three. Honestly though, I had better teachers at the scam school. One worked as an engineer for NASA during Challenger. That professor had stories, experience, and a sense of humor that was far above my others. The English teacher there truly cared for the material, and my other computer teacher was a treasure trove of knowledge. They had far fewer resources, no library, and about 8 classrooms. Morrison was an act of desperation, which, given that is who they are after and they are connected to the educational board, does not change things in my eyes. With how important education is, my attempts to get a degree should not look like a 40-step RPG fetch quest coupled with a degree in figuring out scams. Sure, I know well enough now it is a scam school, but as a young adult, I just saw a computer science degree. Story 31. Sophomore year of engineering school. I was having difficulty with my circuit analysis lab because my partner at the time would either skip the class or have me do all the work. As a result, I had a little idea of what I was doing. When it came to asking my professor for assistance, he would either intimidate me or tell me to think before asking a question. One day he decides to do a pop quiz, and as a result, I had trouble finishing building my circuit. At the end of the quiz, he comes towards me and asks if I really want to be an engineer because I'm a girl and that I should look into psychology or nursing. Left my campus crying, defeated, and highly considered taking time off and looking into a different field of study. I knew computer engineering was my passion and couldn't let an a-hole professor dictate my future, so I decided to prove him wrong. Long story short, day of the third person to finish the test and passed with an A+. Still hate that professor though. Story 32. I was in grad school and volunteered to help organize an event because I wanted the opportunity to network with professionals in my future industry. The professor I was assisting was one I'd never met before. I was the only woman who volunteered, and from day one he was constantly by my side and in my personal space. It felt a little weird, but he kept telling me stories about his wife, how they met, what she does now, etc. The stories were nice, so I wrote off the invasion of my space thinking he was just a close talker because he sure seemed to love his wife. One of the last days he asked if he could introduce me to a friend of his, and I said yes. He proceeded to take my hand, lead me over to his friend, and then stand there the entire time either holding my hand or when I finally twisted it away, stroking my arm. This was not the table flip moment. The table flip moment came the next week when the TA asked me what I thought of working the event with Dr. M, and I hesitantly told him what happened. The other TA just nodded and said, "Yeah, someone told me when I took this job that the department doesn't allow Dr. M to have female TAs." So the school obviously knew this guy was an issue, and instead of doing something substantive about it, they just decided maybe it would be fine if they kept women out of this one position, ignoring how many opportunities there would be for girls to interact or be alone with him. Story 33. Grad school story time. I took a business ethics course and we had a paper asking what we would do if we had to audit a client that our parents had invested the majority of their retirement in, and upon performing the audit, it appeared that the client used some very questionable accounting practices. Best case scenario, the client was an idiot and would need major adjustments that would tank stock prices. Worst case scenario, the client would be the next Enron, WorldCom, etc. I cited all of the proper authoritative literature, saying that the proper course of action in the first place would have been to withdraw from the engagement because it should be considered an independence violation, an option we were not even given based on the paper, but that if we had to work the job that I should not say anything about it to my parents. Thing is though, I kept writing. I said that if this really happened, I would tell my parents to get their money out of the company now. First, I'd try indirectly by giving them some mumbo-jumbo about needing to diversify investments, but eventually I would just straight up tell them the company all of their retirement was in was a house of cards about to collapse if nothing else worked. I then stated that I realized it was not the ethical or correct decision, gave the rationalization that my parents' holdings were likely immaterial to the company or stock market as a whole and would have a barely measurable effect on the market, but would save them financially, that there was a minimal chance I'd be caught, and ended by detailing the penalties I would face if I was caught for insider trading. Professor gave me a C- because I said I would make the unethical, improper decision. People got A's on that paper by doing half the work but saying they'd do the right thing. I thought it was more ethically and morally correct not to lie on a paper, and I got a C-. Only reason I didn't take that crap straight to the dean was because I'd still locked in an A as long as I didn't bomb our final paper due the next month. Lied my butt off on the final paper though, played goody two-shoes and said I'd go by the book on the next ethical dilemma. Got my A in the class. I clearly learned the wrong lesson in my business ethics class. Story 34. Got out of the Navy and worked a few years in retail and kitchen management. Decided I was sick of poverty and enrolled at the university. First semester, I have to take Theater 101. Perfect grades, easy as F class. Then we got a nasty snowstorm, and while the university didn't cancel classes, all of my classes but Theater 101 did, resulting in my maxing my absences for that class. A few weeks before finals, I broken my ankle. I had to miss 2 weeks of classes. The university could only help me get to class if I could drive my 5-speed Cavalier to a certain location to get picked up. Not possible. And nobody I knew with a car was available to help me get to classes. Those 2 weeks were excused by all classes except for Theater 101. Finally got the chance to get to class and talk to my professor about it. She says I've missed too many classes, and because of that, my grade was now failing, from 99% to 54% due to absences. I show her the note from my doctor, a picture of my car that I couldn't drive because I couldn't work the clutch with a broken ankle, and the emails from 5 other professors that excused my absences for the broken ankle, and had canceled classes during snowstorms that she didn't. She, a grad student whose only work experience was scholarships and finally teaching Theater 101, actually told me that in the real world, snowstorms and broken bones don't excuse absences, which caught me so off guard that I fell over. I explained to her that when I was in the Navy, we actually had days canceled in training for snow, and on a few occasions they had people to pick you up, and during my years working as retail and kitchen management, that broken bones, along with other medical issues, were in fact excused or accommodated. This female dog, who has never had a real job, decided to tell someone who spent 6 years active duty in the Navy and 4 years, at the time, working in supervisory and administrative positions how the real world works. I told her to go F herself in a very cheerful and polite voice, and that was it. Got my degree elsewhere, online school that helps veterans, and got a real job, where snow days happen and broken bones/documented medical problems are excused and accommodated. Edit. This was actually my second attempt at school, and her failing grade for that bullcrap put me on administrative suspension, which was why I never went back. I tried to appeal it, but unsuccessfully. As a musical theater major, I can confirm, for some reason, in the most whimsical place on campus, they take attendance more serious than anybody. Story 35. About 12 years ago, I had a professor who was far too open with her political leanings and used her bully pulpit liberally. It was a creative writing class of some sort and met on Saturdays for 2 to 3 hours each week. Each week, a writing assignment was due, and the entire course grade was determined by the weekly writing assignments. Shortly after semester began, my reserve unit began preparing for mobilization. We were deployed to Iraq just after the semester ended, and I had orders most weekends. I spoke with the professor, and she agreed that I could still submit the writing assignments via email. I received 100% on each assignment, but a 2.5 overall in the course. The professor explained that she had full discretion over grades, that I had either chosen to not attend courses or should have anticipated them and not signed up for a weekend class, and that in any case she didn't feel compelled to support our illegal war effort. I appealed to the dean, providing copies of my orders, the email chain I had with the professor, each scored writing assignment, and the syllabus, which described no discretionary grade aspect. The dean refused to even speak with me about the matter, and I was mobilized a couple of weeks later and unable to pursue the matter further. Everybody is entitled to political opinions, but for F's sake, don't take out your anger at the system on young enlisted service members. Sir, thank you for your service, and sorry for your troubles. Story 36. I had a lab for my strength of materials classes that was taught by a PhD student. That day, the lab was on beam deflection under various loading conditions. When performing the lab, the TA was zeroing the plunge gauge not by turning the dial to set 0, but by slamming the pin in and out against the beam until it happened to land close enough to 0. So after the lab, I asked her for a second of her time to show her that the glass dial of the gauge spins and that the lining up of the glass face at 0 to the starting point is how you're supposed to zero the gauge. Well, before I could finish the thought and see if she understood why it was better to zero the gauge this way, the me PhD, a chair in the department or something, who was in charge of the equipment in the lab, came over to yell at me that I was going to break the gauge. I tried to explain that I was showing the TA how to zero the gauge, to which he started slamming the pin of the gauge in and out just as his understudy had, with a look on his face that screamed, "You're a freaking idiot, kid! You don't know what you're talking about!" I couldn't process the situation, so I just walked away, and I have never been so dumbfounded in my life. Story 37. I didn't rage quit college, but I rage quit a major. I was originally in a game design interaction design department. I was one of 6 girls in the program, approximately 100 students, and one professor taught 80% of the classes. He would make comments on how the industry needed strong figures and how casual gaming was ruining the industry. He spent the whole semester making snide comments to myself and 2 other girls in the program. We had 4 classes together with him, about he was sure we were cheating, we wouldn't be this good, etc. Start the second semester, and we begin learning C++. This was billed as an introductory course, no prior knowledge whatsoever needed. We get to class, and he skipped nearly half the textbook. Turns out he had personally emailed everyone else in the class but myself and another girl about the prereq homework to be done over break. When questioned about resources to bring himself up to speed after class was ended and others were filing out, he started to scream at me that this is why women shouldn't be in the industry, why this is a man's job, etc. I wish I could say I told him to go F himself. Instead, I ran out crying, called my mom, bawling. She made me go to the ombudsman, and it turns out this event was that professor's 3rd strike. She got witnesses from my class, and during midterm break, he was let go. The official story was he had a family emergency that caused him to leave. I felt bad for the other two professors in the department because they had to take his workload. It left such a sour taste in my mouth I switched majors to motion media and advertising. Story 38. I had a professor in my second year of graphic design who started okay, but come second semester, he became the biggest, laziest, whiny, passive-aggressive a-hole I've ever met. He would very often brief us on our assignments by literally pulling the instructions onto the projector and reading it word for word in a low-effort voice. He got annoyed when people asked him for clarification, as if it was somehow our fault that none of us knew how to do the assignment. I don't think he knew that reading the document word for word is not teaching us anything. One day he went off the rails and told us all that most of the submissions for our latest assignment were all crap, and that if we kept it up like this, we won't get any jobs or opportunities in the design world. Made me want to drop out then and there. The good thing is, I'm pretty sure my friends and I got him fired from the college. A bunch of us submitted complaints and filled out our teacher assessment papers very scathingly at the end of the year. He didn't come back for a third year. F you, Anthony. Story 39. My senior year in undergrad for electrical engineering. This class's grade was comprised of a midterm and final exam. No quizzes, homework as extra credit, lab work, nothing. A few weeks after the midterm, which was really effing hard, we finally got our grades. I got a 36 on it. 70 is considered passing. I heavily considered dropping the class. I talked with the professor, his office hours, and told him that I was super bummed out about my performance on the exam and was going to discuss leaving his class. He suggested not to. I figured might as well stay since I won't get any money back anyway. After the grueling final exam, which I got a 40-something on, he tells us what his plan was. He intentionally makes the exams hard as F so that it includes things we didn't even discuss to see if you can think outside the box. He then curves the grades based on the class performance. Turns out that my 36 in the midterm was the second highest grade for my class, so I got an A+. Same for the final exam. Going to office hours to discuss leaving the class saved my butt. By the end of the semester, his class size was about a quarter of what it was at the start. Always talk to your professors. Okay, I get it, like I see the vision, but that's kind of douchey because of how young these kids are. They get discouraged so easy. I guess I won't be electrical engineering after all. Just help the poor kids out. Story 40. I was about to start my third year of undergrad film BFA, which was my second degree at the college where I got my first degree. At the end of the first week, I checked online and all my classes have been dropped. Apparently, I had run out of eligible credit hours for financial aid, so my financial aid never came through. It triggered all my classes to drop. Later that afternoon, I contacted the head of the film program, with whom I had a number of issues with both him and the program in general just a few months prior. I informed him that I wouldn't be completing my degree and wished the school the best of luck. About an hour later, he called me back and asked what classes I needed to finish in order to earn my degree. He waived a couple of the classes that were actually redundant for the classes I had already completed and let me finish my degree with just 2 more classes instead of 6. So I had actually rage quit and he convinced me to get back online to finish out the game. Story 41. I actually rage quit college over the following story. I was attending a very religious college in Utah. I was majoring in education, which is a very secular subject. We studied all the subjects, and as I went into my final semesters before student teaching, we started to get into student behavior classes. This one particular class and professor was very religious leaning and would bring up teaching religion in our classrooms and other ways bringing more souls into the fold. I'd gone to the dean and complained about what was being taught, but to no avail. Mind you, I am a man in a very predominantly female major and the only male in my class, so it was easy to figure out who was the squeaky wheel. We were given a study on autism to read and prepare for class, but it was fairly outdated, mid-1980s outdated. Now, both my parents were educators. We'd often talk about students' needs, and autism were brought up a few times. So when this mid-80s study on autism was presented, it countered a lot of the current understandings of autism. My mom provided me a more recent study, and I emailed my professor to ask for her thoughts on it, since it countered a lot of the original studies she gave us. She emailed me back letting me know she'd look into it prior to class so we could discuss it. The The day of the lecture, she didn't bring up the study and continued to teach a very religious-leaning lecture on how autism was related to the parents' sins. I raised my hand, brought up the new study, and asked her for her opinion. Point blank in front of the class, she says, "This is the Lord's school, and you have to take what I'm teaching on faith." That was the last straw. I left, went straight to the dean, explained what happened, and he told me that I was wrong. I walked out and never returned. I transferred to another college and continued my career from there. Story 42. Oh boy, I've got a story for you. For one of my classes, my professor required us to work in groups to write a collective essay as our final exam. 3 out of the 4 of us were pretty upstanding students. However, it was that 4th guy who we knew was the problem. He was a lazy loser who never did anything. We were constantly badgering him to do anything that would contribute to the project, and we went into the professor's office multiple times requesting that he be removed from our group. Finally, the 3 of us cornered the professor in her office and made a public ordeal out of it. We had the people nervously glancing in at us from the hallway. Needless to say, it was quite loud. By this point, it was only a day away from the deadline. However, the professor decided to hash this out with the troublemaker in the room. She called that dysfunctional guy into her office and asked why he hadn't contributed anything. He gave some non-committal answer like, "I didn't know it was due tomorrow." I just about had an aneurysm from that. We got into a shouting match as I yelled at him that we'd been reminding and badgering him constantly since the essay was first assigned to us. There was no way in heck that he didn't know the deadline was coming up. So the professor decided that having a troublemaker on our team wasn't bad enough. She decided to screw us further. She gave us an ultimatum. Either show her some concrete proof that this guy had contributed to writing our essay by the deadline tomorrow, or she would fail all 4 of us. We spent that night writing that douche's portion of the essay for him, because as soon as he walked out of that office, he disappeared for the rest of the night. It didn't matter how often we called him or emailed him, he just wouldn't answer. I also spent an hour and a half going back through our Google Docs history looking for any evidence that he'd done anything, before finding that in the month and a half we'd been working on this, he had only written 3 words. So I printed out those 3 words, walked into the professor's office the next day, and slapped the paper down on her desk. I slammed that thing down so hard that it caused the picture of her son to bounce off the desk. Later that day, when the 3 of us were out taking a walk, we saw the douche across the street. We cornered him and told him he was the biggest idiot we knew, and if we wouldn't have been expelled for doing so, we'd have beaten the crap out of him right there. A couple weeks later, we had our grades posted, and we got an A. We were very heavily considering going to the dean to report both the student and the professor, but once we saw our grade, we decided to let the matter drop. We managed to escape with our grades intact, and that was enough. To this day, it still makes me seethe to know that that douche got a free A for that class, though. Story 43. This is a sad story. In my second year of university, not long before Christmas break, my grandfather was in a vehicle accident and ended up in the hospital. It didn't seem that serious at first, but after a couple of days, he slipped into a coma and stayed there and somehow just never got better. Things went downhill with occasional brief flashes of hope for about 3 weeks. In the first week of January, when it was clear that this event wasn't going to end well, classes started again, and I had a test in a French class worth 15% of my final grade. But that day, my family also had a meeting scheduled at the hospital to make the decision to end life support. I emailed my professor to explain why I couldn't take the test that day, and he wrote back that I could do it the next day. But given the situation, that was also not going to happen. I had to simply not take the test. My grandfather actually died on the morning of the day we were supposed to make that decision as we were on our way to the hospital. Missing the test would have been annoying enough, but my grades were good enough to handle it, and it was hardly at the top of my list of concerns at the time, so it didn't bother me too much. But the first day I got back to class, the professor gave this long lecture about how sometimes students try to get out of classwork with what he called white thread excuses, i.e. stories that are so obviously untrue that it shows up as clearly as a white thread on a black coat, or something like that. He stared at me for a good part of the speech. I was in tears and I should have just got up and left and probably complained to the university, but I was, and am, pretty shy and didn't really have the courage to do it. I've hated that professor ever since, though. I'm sorry. That's a really sucky position to be in. Unfortunately, that is one of the #1 excuses that people use to get out of things, that and animals. So I, personally, am genuinely going to apologize because I have used that excuse before, and I'm sorry that someone who was actually in that situation was being blamed for being in it. Hope you're on the up and up though, and rest in peace, grandfather. Story 44. I went to college to study classical guitar, emphasis on theory and composition. I was excited to begin formal training. Right off the bat, they told us that being a music major was a 5-year program. Sure, fine, whatever. Let's get started. It took me 2 weeks to finally track down my applied instrument instructor. He never returned calls or emails and was rarely in his office. Eventually, the instruction began, and after 2 weeks, he notified the head of the department that he would not instruct me left-handed. Well, I'm left-handed. I didn't have a choice. I tried and tried to retrain myself to play my instrument correctly, and ultimately I fell behind. The thing about that program is that every course was related to every other. Piano instruction was mandatory, your applied instrument, ear training, music theory, of course your juries and whatnot as well. If you struggle in one, you are likely to struggle in all of them. And I did. I was being forced to learn an instrument against my natural disposition and wasted time and money on a program that didn't care. It created kind of a divide between some of the students and some of the faculty. It was no secret that I was struggling, and my teachers and friends helped me beyond what they should have, but by the time it counted, it wasn't enough. All of the incoming class, we were all very close. Maybe 20 of us total in the program. My best friend at the time was the darling of the music department. Years of proper instruction long before she enrolled, and it was always sort of ironic that the two of us were best buddies. Lots of teachers were on my side and understood the struggle and sympathized, but the department head was not one of them. My hands were effectively tied. My parents wanted me to sue on discrimination grounds, but I didn't want to be another whiny college kid who couldn't get his way. So I withdrew from the program before I tanked all of my options. Music is for everyone. The day that smug loser told me my heroes were children was the day I wanted to rage quit. Apparently, after I left, there was a bit of a movement, and eventually that son of a female dog started instructing left-handed students without any fuss or concern. I hope it really chaps his butt. To this day, I remember my instructor and the department head, and I'm thankful for the time I was there and the things I learned. That experience opened the doors to adventures and travels I never would have seen otherwise, but I never forgave them, and I don't really plan to. Edit. MA and LH, go F yourselves. Story 45. I'll preface this by saying I'm a mechanical engineering student, and never have I ever before wanted to drop a class so much. Freshman year of university, I had to take a programming class. What was supposed to be a very basic class turned into a nightmare. The first thing that made me want to drop this class was the syllabus. 10% homework, 40% midterm, and a 50% final. I mean, I've heard of 40% finals, but 50%? Anyways, what made this class unbearable was actually the professor himself. He was by far the most self-entitled, arrogant, "I'm doing you a favor for existing" person I have ever met in my entire life. The professor would never grade the homework that we turned in. In fact, the course ended and I still have no idea what I had scored on the first assignment. God forbid you ask a question. He would not only single you out in front of the entire class and make you feel stupid, but would also make fun of you for asking such a question. The only satisfying thing about that class was when the time came to review the professor. Now it's a running joke around campus that Professor so-and-so only teaches here in order to have free access to the university gym. Bonus. Some guy actually had a full-blown mental breakdown and started cussing out the professor about his poor teaching habits during his lecture. That student left and never returned to class. Story 46. Apologies in advance for sounding braggadocious, but it's necessary to the story. Second semester of my senior year of college, I had switched from the College of Business to the College of Liberal Arts. I'd already finished in business by the end of my third year and was getting a second degree in the College of Liberal Arts. Each college had a requirement that students take 2 classes of science, one of which would be a social science and one of which was a physical science. I had completed my physical science class for the College of Business my freshman year, Psych 210, the brain and the mind. It was an interesting class that taught a lot about the chemistry underlying brain function. When I went to complete the courses for the College of Liberal Arts, I was informed that the college did not accept that class as a physical science class. I appealed to the college as I had already fulfilled the requirement in the College of Business. The difference between the two was stupid, in my opinion. And frankly, the class had a very hard physical sciences bend despite being in the College of Psychology. I got back a form letter denying my request for a waiver, saying that the college wouldn't waive the requirement because they felt their students needed to be well-rounded. So I dropped the German language elective I'd planned on taking and added Geology 103, Rocks for Jocks, instead. I graduated after that semester. In 4 years, I had amassed over 5.5 years of credit hours, spoke 4 languages, and was summa cum laude with 2 degrees and 3 majors. Thankfully, I was able to take that Rocks for Jocks class so that I was well-rounded. Story 47. Finally, one I can answer. After senior year, I graduate. Walk at graduation. Grandparents throw me a graduation party, the whole nine. I am waiting for my diploma for months and email the school to see where it is. They inform me that they did a final audit of my transcript and discovered that I was erroneously given credit towards a major elective for one of the community college classes I had taken summer of sophomore year, a class that my advisor had told me to take and would satisfy that requirement. Lots of going back and forth. I'm basically told to go eat a wiener and that I have to make up for that requirement. And not only that, but I need to take 2 community college classes since they're only 3-credit courses and the requirement I'm missing is 4 credits. Fine. I pick 2 classes at the local community college and have my advisor approve them. Ask her to double check and tell me in writing that they are sufficient. Take them, get a B- in one. They inform me that since it was for my major, I need to have gotten a B in it to count. Need to take it again. Take it again next semester, get an A. Keep in mind I'm paying all these classes out of pocket with money working at Chipotle. Advisors tell me I'm good to go. Apply for graduation again. Get an email from the dean telling me that class that I've now taken twice actually does not apply and that my advisor was mistaken. Tries to tell me that I need to take another class and that it's out of their hands. I write a long email pleading with the dean and her response is essentially, "It is your responsibility to know what requirements you have for your major, and they can't adjust academic requirements due to one student's lack of responsibility." Long story short, I threatened to sue the crap out of the school and sent screenshots of my advisor guaranteeing me the courses were sufficient. And all of a sudden, there was a form that I can fill out to get approval to override the requirement. I just need to go have the Dean of English sign it, in person. Can't be faxed or emailed. And then I need to have the head of records and registration sign it, also in person. By this point in time, I've moved to another state for a job and the person I need to sign the form is only there for 2 days during the week until 2 p.m. So I need to take off from work to drive the hour plus to school. I put it off for ages because I started this new job and basically had to explain to my boss this entire situation to get approval to take off. Drive all the way there and the person I need to get to sign it is on vacation. I drive back home totally dejected and send a heartfelt pleading email to the head of records and registration and she informs me that I definitely do not need to have it signed in person. Just email it over and she'll take care of it. Awesome. I got approved for graduation literally 2 days later. They had just told me that I needed to drive there to get back at me for threatening to sue. Story 48. I had an awful class once. It was Embedded Systems Programming. This was a 4XX or senior level course. The first 2 weeks were a primer on C++, including rudimentary flow control like if statements. Then we broke into group projects, and he grades on the worst things. We had to do periodic presentations on our progress, not small ones, 15 plus minutes apiece. Each slide had to have a picture. You had to address bullet points that he shares beforehand. But he was so particular about how the responses had to be phrased and the bullet points were incredibly vague. The TA was useless and we needed him to get equipment for our projects, but he was never available even in the times he said he was available. Each presentation required us to go to his office and argue with him for an hour just to earn a passing grade. The worst part is, after dealing with his bullcrap for 2 months, I emailed the department head, her secretary, and my teacher about it in a very clear point-by-point email with screenshot proof of invalid claims, and I never heard a word about it. By far my least favorite college class. Story 49. I'm just about a half a semester away from finishing up my BSN degree at a small private college. This school only recently started offering the BSN option about 5 years back, but had an established ASN program for quite some time. My frustration has been the inconsistency in educators, curriculum requirements, and policy changes. Few examples. Rounding during math problems. In the beginning, we rounded only at the very end. Halfway through the program, they changed it so that you round every step of the equation. How is that more accurate? Being told we were unable to record both audio and visual lectures. No clear reason has been given, and if you want to do it, you have to get special permissions/accommodations. The ASN program gets rotations in the ICU, OR, and ER. The BSN program does not. It's all med-surg. It's near impossible to get credits transferred in for the majority of the prereqs, even if you've taken more advanced courses. The school is just money-hungry black hole that sucks the will out of their students. We utilize outdated supplies despite paying huge tuition costs and have yet to figure out where the money is going. The school pretty much sends its students up to fail. Edit. For anyone who uses HESI and has to complete the adaptive quizzes, F that noise. You can answer 12 by 12 questions correctly and still take 10 tries or more to level up to 1. Now imagine how long it can take to get up to level 3. Story 50. I was assigned to an advisor who flat out told me that he didn't want to be advising and he didn't really know how to do it. Going into my final semester, senior year, he goes, "Oh yeah, you haven't taken any of your Spanish credits. It's 3 classes all prereqs of each other." Obviously, I'm shocked and ask him why I am just hearing this now. "Oh, well, I must have forgotten to tell you. It's going to be pretty tough to complete that, huh?" A combination of dumb luck, a bit of fraud, and a lot of hard work, I got all the credits. No thanks to that mouth breather. Story 51. I have a few stories about my university. One, we had a biology/chemistry teacher for a class of like 200 that was fired for creeping during a final. Some backstory. The dude was always a little off. He would call up Victoria's Secret to see if his favorite girls were working, then get mad when they wouldn't tell him who was working. He would start off stories like, "I went to go into VS to pay off my bill," and no, he doesn't have a wife or girlfriend, he just spends insane amount of money there. The firing. During an exam, he was using his teacher's computer that was hooked up to a projector. Normally, you turn these projectors off during a test, and he believed that he did, but he didn't. The entire class was able to see him browsing Victoria's Secret website, zooming in on the genitalia of the lingerie models. He was promptly removed from teaching classes. I don't know if he was technically fired though, but he's not allowed to teach now. 2. An accounting teacher caused my friend to unalive himself. There's this teacher at our university who taught the 2 most advanced accounting courses. He's not the best English teacher, but he manages for the most part. He's a 100% hard butt for homework. He assigned us 14 group projects that we had to present over 10 weeks in advanced accounting, taking up 60% of all class time. In his information systems class, he assigned endless homework that was never really explained, and a friend of mine took it a semester or 2 after I did, but eventually unalived himself a few weeks in, posting on Facebook that it was because he was too stressed. This was not a dumb man, he was smart and capable, but I believe school overwhelmed him. I was ground zero for knowing because he didn't use Facebook much, but I had found him on there, so I was the only one who was connected with him on Facebook. When I told my good professor and our friends about it, one response was, "The bad professor students unalived themselves?" Again? Yes, our professor has a mortality rate that's actually pretty high. Thankfully, the good professor I had, who even went to the funeral with us, he's incredibly kind, caring, and understanding, and is now teaching advanced accounting instead. I'll stop it there because the third story is just a generic bad teacher who couldn't speak English to save his life. He refers to the mini-heap sword as a mini-heap. He would just ramble incoherently, then follow up with, "And if you don't get that, you will fail my class." These 2, though, really stand out. Story 52. Current student in my major is international relations and minor in data science. I am an Army infantry vet using the GI Bill. I say this because I'm pretty used to dealing with crappy situations and people, and also understand that just because you get a degree, you aren't entitled to a job. Last winter semester, I took a class that was required for my major about American foreign policy, and it was being taught by my program's director, and I was excited. Day 1 of the class, the professor starts bragging about how they've been teaching at the school since 1994, never getting professional experience since then and before. Also, when I asked if we could buy a previous edition of the textbook, she says, and I quote, "Well, I would say that education is important and that when you buy expensive books, you are really investing in your future. So I would suggest to buy the newest book. It has pictures I like. Also, I don't know what else you guys would spend the money on. Maybe sandwiches?" I said, "Rent?" out loud, and she didn't like that. Whatever, I bought the book anyway. As we go through the semester, I start to learn that what we're learning is almost literally from Wikipedia articles. Later on, we start to learn about American intelligence agencies. In the middle of the class, the professor goes on about students coming to her saying they want to work for the State Department or the government. DO, VIA, HAS, and she went on a rant saying that the school has never had a student go on to do that in the last 60 years, even though one of the alumni was a Russian ambassador, and that she doesn't understand why students want to do that. Now, this doesn't sound like a big deal, but one of the main selling points that the OR department likes to tell people is that you could work for places like that, i.e. they tell people it's a possibility if they take the program's path, a path that she effing writes about. I about walked out of the class after that. Story 53. From the professor side, I teach a very specialized course in a very specialized program. In the syllabus, there is a heavy mark penalty for absence, and states that if you miss a certain number of classes, you fail. I had a student miss twice that number without providing any justification and had middling assignment and test scores. The student's grades ended up being slightly more than half the passing grade. The student appealed the mark. I provided the appeals panel with all the coursework, attendance records, and correspondence between myself and the student, where I am continually informing the student of their academic peril if they continue missing class. The appeals panel passed the student. Story 54. TA of my Human Anatomy 2 lab was one of the worst people I have ever encountered in academics. One day she chastised everyone because the whole class studied the wrong section for a quiz because our syllabus had the wrong section. She claimed we should have had the foresight to always check both the physical and online syllabus in case one was wrong. I raised my hand and asked why we would assume it was wrong and check the other one. At the end of the year, I found out I lost half of the semester's participation points because of that outburst. So I replied back with the definition of the word outburst and a video of someone having an outburst and said, "This is what an actual outburst looks like." She said she forwarded my email to the professor, whom I was already emailing about how terrible her behavior was. He emailed me back and essentially said, "Yeah, just don't waste your time arguing with her, your grade is fine." Then I got signed consent from our whole class to present their grades to the dean of our honors program, illustrating how an entire class of people excelling in their lecture were failing in the lab while every other lab with the other TA was doing very well because of the discrepancies in her testing versus his. He agreed wholeheartedly something was wrong, and after speaking with the lecture professor and seeing that everyone essentially wrote a short story of negative feedback towards her, bumped up everyone's grades by roughly 2 letters. It was one of the greatest victories I have ever achieved. Story 55. I was really into space as a kid. I knew everything about the planets, etc. In high school, I read Carl Sagan's books and others. The point is, I really knew my crap about space. I took an Astronomy 101 class. It was super easy. The midterm had 100 multiple choice questions. I could have taken it in the 5th grade and got a 100%. I finished it in about 10 minutes and got every question correct. The professor accused me of cheating. I explained to him that the class was ridiculously easy and that I was taking it because I needed to start there to get to the real advanced classes. He didn't believe me. So the only solution was for me to retake the test in his office. He gave it to me and I finished it again in about 10 minutes and shoved it in his effing face. I said something like, "I mean, this is like 5th grade space questions, multiple choice, dude." Never once got an apology from that a-hole, though. Story 56. My business management professor didn't allow us to use the restroom, ever. At the beginning of the semester, I explained that I had a condition and could get her a doctor's note. She said it was fine as long as I sat towards the front. I never ended up going to the bathroom during her class, but I came to class very sick and had to vomit. I get up to leave and she stops class just to stare at me. She questions where I'm going. "I'm going to go vomit. It's either that or on your floor." I walked out and slammed the door. Later that semester, she spent all of the President's Day reading the names of the presidents off of the back of a bottle of gin. My parents ended up speaking with the dean over how clearly she was phoning it in. Story 57. Had a professor who would grade things based on how he felt. Points didn't matter, just perceived effort. Examples: 2 students put nearly identical answers on a test, same content and such, just the wording was different. One got full credit, and the other got half credit. The students went to ask him why there was a discrepancy in the grading, and instead of fixing the grade, he just said, "That's unfortunate." At the end of the year, our grades were determined by how much he liked each student instead of some point scale like everyone else. He would doctor it so he had a perfect bell curve of A, B, C, D. He would do this by taking the students and listing them from highest grade to lowest. Then arbitrarily pick where the division between A and B were B and C, and so on. To top all this off, his tests were impossible to finish on time, and average grades on tests were around 50%. There's nothing like feeling you're failing an entire semester to make you want to rage quit college. Dude, that's so stupid. I've had professors like that again that really truly grade based on how much they like the student. And it's wild. And it sucks every time, except for twice. I was the favorite, and it worked well because I was awful at college writing too. Story 58. Professor here, I want to quit often for a number of reasons. Most of them are related to other people who work at the college, administrators, and other faculty who go on power trips. The gossip mill is ruthless. I have anxiety now about new email notifications. I'm not joking. Related to students, every single effing time I get an email 10 minutes past the due date of an assignment asking for more time to finish, after having days and weeks to get it done, every time someone shows up to the next class after having an exam days or even the week before, with some excuses about why they missed the exam and didn't communicate anything to me at all. Every time I find out that someone in the group project has ignored all email and efforts to communicate. I love helping students learn. I do, I love it. But dang, do you students sabotage yourselves constantly? Just effing show up to class and do your work and we'd all be so much happier. Story 59. Every year, books and book buyback made me want to rage quit. Buy this book you'll likely never use, but it's required text. Took Intro to Psychology or Psych 101 or the likes freshman year. They wanted like $140 for the frickin' book, and refusing to buy a book for that price, not understanding that all college books are about this much, I found a seller online in Sweden, selling the same book with free shipping for 25 bucks. Seeing an opportunity to make money on this, I bought 10 of them for $250. At the end of the semester, I sold back all 10 books for $90 each. Got some strange looks from the dudes doing the buyback, but it worked like a charm. How did this make me want to rage quit college, you ask? This is when I realized that all the books are scams. They're scamming the population of America, who often are vulnerable navigating a scary education system and just need a helping hand. If a frickin' company across the planet can sell me the same identical book, not the international version, it was the US version, hardback, same ISBN, for a fraction of the cost, and have the cost include global shipping, then the US booksellers are just SAers. From then on, I bought international softcover books from Thailand or Singapore. Often bought many more than one and would sell them in class the first day. For those who don't know already, the international version are almost always the exact same book with a different picture on the cover, and it's not hardback. Check eBay before you buy from the bookstore. Even coming from Singapore, books would show up in a matter of a few days, not weeks like Chinese stuff on eBay. That would have been good to know. I did try and buy an online copy of a book once, and I just never got it, so glad it worked out, dude. Frickin' dang it. Story 60. Former student here. In my first semester of my freshman year of college, I had to take a computer science course. It was the introductory one, so since I had a tiny bit of programming experience already, it was catching on very quickly. Just 3 weeks into the semester, we're doing our second weekly project. I've completed the project for the week that was due the next day when a very attractive girl from my class came up to me and asked me if I had done it. I told her I had, and she responded that she was really needing some help with it. I had other classwork to do, so I said unfortunately I couldn't help. She turned on the puppy dog eyes and started telling me how she just doesn't get it, and how she just really wants some help. I finally agree, and she says, "You don't even have to take time to help. If I can just glance at your code to see how you did it, that would be great." I saw where this was going, so I told her that I wasn't going to help her plagiarize. She swears on every living family member of hers that she will not cheat. She just wants to see how to solve the hard parts of the coding project. I finally agree and give her the file. This female dog takes the file, changes the file name, changes the names of some variables, slaps her name on it, and submits it. So a few days later, lo and behold, we get called in by the professor separately and have to explain ourselves. I tell him the entire story and am basically told, tough crap. It was then that I learned that people can be massive a-holes and I will still be the one to suffer repercussions. I was threatened with academic suspension or being failed out of the course, but eventually we were both given a warning and a 0 on the project. F that girl. The freaking puppy dog eyes. It's not fair, man. It really isn't. It's a limitless power, and I have never been able to see through it. I've also been scammed a couple times by that. God dang it. Girls, don't misuse that power. It's not fair. Story 61. I'd received an 11 out of 115 on a test in my DS1 class, and I was upset. I studied hard for that class and didn't believe for a second that my grade was that low. I emailed him and he was trying to say that it doesn't matter, but I got him to meet with me and go over the test. He took a look at it for like 8 minutes with this puzzled look on his face. Next thing I hear is, You had a near perfect score. I don't know what the heck I was doing. He had something like 110 minus 70 equals 40 plus 2 equals 11 as my grade. No sense to whatever he was doing. I guess the other test grades were so bad he was drinking to keep going or something. Same professor always talked about eating bananas and kept telling us to get him canes for Christmas. A colleague of mine said he saw the professor wandering a Walmart parking lot in the rain, muttering to himself. Guy was a trip and infuriating. Story 62. Freshman year of college, I got really sick. Like constantly in the hospital or at doctor's sick. I worked really hard with all of my teachers to ensure I was meeting minimum attendance requirements and making good grades, etc. I talked with each of them weekly and often met with my English teacher one-on-one to ensure I was still within passing attendance. Got to the end of the semester and worked really hard on the final, which was to rewrite 3 old papers. I turned it in and my teacher told me she couldn't pass me due to attendance. When I asked why she didn't tell me sooner, she sheepishly said she liked reading my writing, so she didn't want me to not do my final. That one still makes me angry. I appealed the board but lost because I wasn't diagnosed with anything yet. I ended up having degenerative disc disease and Crohn's. Story 63. I took an ethics course once. Worst decision ever. It's not about teaching you to think ethically and think for yourself. It's about getting you to think just like the professor. I, and a few others as well, got tricked into it because the name was something like Ethic in the Emerging Digital World, so we thought it would fit our majors, all computer majors. The course name changed after a week 1 to something like Ethics Through Digital Media, since it was the first year it was offered. Once she was talking about how the most used source for news was the internet, but that wasn't good because the ability to lie online. We pointed out that TV has almost double the following for news and that the article she used as a source was a fake article site. The way she reacted, you could tell she had no idea about that. Later on, we were discussing homosexuality and gender and whatnot in video games. She basically was trying to say sexism and homophobia is what drives games to have a few female or gay characters. She went on a huge rant when I pointed out realism. No, professor, you did not see gay people in medieval Europe because at the time it was seen as a huge sin and very bad, not because game developers are homophobic. No, professor, game developers aren't sexist because they don't have a female soldier in the World War I game. They only saw combat really in Russia, and even that was limited. No, professor, game developers aren't racist because there was no African Americans in a game about Vikings, knights, and samurais fighting each other. She also claimed Pokemon Go was racist and that there was no defending it. Why? Because minority neighborhoods and cities did not have nearly as many stops, gyms, spawns as other parts of the cities. The article we had to read for it showed a screenshot from some minority neighborhood in a city showing like 10 stops and 3 gyms all within a 20-minute walk. So I pulled up a screenshot from my hometown, nowhere near a city, a 40-minute walk to hit 2 stops and 1 gym. The problem has nothing to do with the race, it has to do with the fact it's a copy-paste from their older game that had a much smaller player base and all locations where players submitted. One of the worst was an article we had to read that was about diversity in games. It claimed that homosexuality, transgenders needed to be represented more in games, and even included the results of a study to support it. The study was asking minorities and transgender/homosexuals about how they felt the representation was. They all said how it is now fine. Forcing it causes issues because the characters aren't organic and just not good for the game. But if the characters were well done and fit the story, it was kind of just cool. But nothing special enough to sway the decision to get the game. Of course, the article decided that they were all brainwashed by media and so they needed more diversity in games anyway. Of course, the professor agreed wholeheartedly with that. Essentially, the class was just SJW stuff the entire time and a ton of hardcore feminist ideals. She didn't actually teach ethics, but rather this is the way I think, this is the right way to think. Story 64. Mine's a bit of a perfect storm. 1. Having what was supposed to be a condensed 1-year college diploma for computer networking being revised to be a 2-year course. We were told this after all the registration and everything was done. 2. Finding out the school was actually getting rid of the course midway through, but that they would continue to support students finishing up the program. 3. I guess supporting meant removing as much support as they could, because after that we found out we were no longer able to take certification exams in school anymore and would have to travel 1.5 to 4+ hours away to take them. Before this crap show, I was in a graphics design course where my web design teacher, who was also the head of the department, taught us how to use Dreamweavers through nothing but YouTube tutorials. Dreamweaver was bad enough, but the fact that she was literally just looking for tutorials to show us instead of an actual lesson was ridiculous. This moron is still in charge of the department. I can only hope they actually got some experience to teach newer students, because holy crap, that was absolute bullcrap. I can guarantee you some poor graduate tried to interview for a web design gig and probably mentioned they knew how to use Dreamweaver. Edit. Insult to injury, the one staff who actually knew web design and programming and animation, guy was an all-around awesome teacher in person. He was canned for whatever reason. Probably for the best. Guy must be laughing now, doing something ultimately better. Story 65. Didn't make me want to rage quit, but it's an entertaining story nonetheless. Senior year. The first one. I took a victory lap for a second major. I had an algorithms class. It was one of my school's numerous 400, 800 level classes where undergrad and grad students took the same course with different requirements. In this class, it meant there were bonus problems on the homework and exams required of the grad students. But while they were typically more difficult, on the midterm, the bonus problem was unusually easy. There's a classic problem in algorithms called the rod cutting problem. You have a list of prices where if you sell a rod of a given integer length, you get so much money. How do you cut up a longer rod to maximize profit? The details are irrelevant to this story, but suffice it to say that there's a well-known algorithm for solving it. For the midterm, we had to produce an algorithm for a variant problem, which each cut costs C dollars, my algorithms, and proof. Assume I need to pay C dollars to buy the rod. Now every time I add a rod to the pile I'm selling, it costs that much. So regardless of how many rods I have or how long they are, I get C less per rod. Thus, you have to subtract C from every price, plug the modified prices into the original algorithm, get the maximum profit, and add back in the C dollars I didn't actually have to spend. My professor didn't believe it would work, so I sent him a more rigorous and mathematical proof. He still didn't believe it would work, and claimed I had broken the optimal substructure property. So I sent a proof that I hadn't. Never heard back from him, so I went to the TA. He spent half an hour trying to come up with a counterexample before conceding that my algorithm actually did work. He still didn't give me many points back because the professor cared more about the form of the proof for undergrads, and mine was admitted non-traditional, but by that point, all I really cared about was the smug satisfaction of being told my algorithm worked. Also unrelated to that, I actually happened to meet said TA's sister at a party in the part of town known for its wild and crazy parties, and got her number. Story 66. Before you got to start classes, my university required all students to attend a mandatory orientation over the weekend. They had to stay in the original dorms. This was a ploy to get commuter students to decide they'd do much better if they dormed, thus adding an additional $3,000 a semester. However, these dorms were from the 70s and looked like an abandoned ghost hall that hadn't been cleaned since they were built. Everything was brown. The students who were actually dorming and not commuters there for orientation were staying in these new Apple Store-looking state-of-the-art dorms a couple blocks over. A few students caught on to this and made a quick friend to get the heck out of the 70s ghost town and sleep over. But first, I couldn't poop in public places. Pee? Yes. Poop? I do that crap at home. So at this orientation, there's free food everywhere, and on the first day, I realized the emergency I was in. Abdominal cramps galore, but my pride made me refuse to go. The 70s dorm's bathroom had basically flooded and wasn't functional. The only option was to use the university facilities, which were constantly full with people who I dared not expose my smelly loud shame to. By the second night, I made a quick friend to get myself the heck out of 70s ghost town. These new dorms were immaculate. However, the fun was cut short after a long 2 days of constant free food, and I had nowhere to run except the communal dorm bathroom. I made the decision my bowels would rip if I didn't allow a release, so I snuck in unseen and unleashed the worst, most painful, toxic crap of my life. I knew it was bad, but God, this was hell. I scramble and find some spray to cover the scent, but in my embarrassment, I use half the bottle. Slipped out unnoticed and scrambled as far away from the bathroom as possible in hopes to disassociate myself from the nuclear war that I had left in there. About 5 minutes, all the girls in the dorm start screaming, gagging, or rolling on the floor with laughter and disgust. I knew my face was bright red. Running from the shame, I left that night to go home and cry and take a more relaxing crap in the comfort of my own home, as I hadn't completely finished the deed. The next morning, I felt like the new me. me. Drove back downtown, parked my car, and commerced the last day of orientation on Sunday and was super ready to start classes the following Monday. When it was finally time to go home and I was certain I did not want to dorm ever, I'm horrified to find my driver's side window shattered and anything of value missing from my car. Story 67. Registered for graduation and received an email telling me I was 3 credits short of my total needed. All because I listened to my advisor when, after I brought him my proposed course load for my final semester, he told me to take 1 class off since I'd have 3 more credits than I needed with that schedule. I fought him on this point as I had meticulously scheduled myself every semester and tracked my remaining credits. He insisted, told me to pull off the extra 3 credits. I told him I didn't believe I should. After more back and forth, I finally ended with, "Fine, I'll do this because you're my advisor, but if this prevents me from graduating, then you are going to hear from me." Lo and behold, when I ask him to answer for this, he tells me there's nothing that can be done. He says he talked with the school and they couldn't get me into any courses or waive the credits due to his inability to properly do math. He and the school told me I'd have to take the 9th semester with a single 3-credit course. I wasn't going to stand for that. Luckily, my school had just started with online courses. This was 2009. They had 2 cycles per semester, and we were 2 weeks past the drop-add period for the 2nd cycle. I went around the registrar and the various offices, went directly to the professor of the only online course that I could take with my previous courses and prerequisites, and explained my story. He told me if I got in, he'd give me the whole semester to catch up on work. I told him if I was allowed into the class, I'd do a month's worth of work by day 2. I bring his email and recommendation to the registrar, who fought me on being added to the course. I told them that if I wasn't allowed in, I would draft a very thorough suit on everything from false advertising to breach of contract. I told them that I would not hesitate to use all the free time I would have during a 1-course semester to drag the school's name through the mud publicly, and would not hesitate to personally sue my advisor and bury him in paperwork until he was unable to do his job he was being paid for. I told them, if you think I'm annoying to your office now, imagine how much worse I'd be with 3 fewer classes. They had a quick, closed-door meeting, came back and said I was approved to take the online class, and I finished the backlog of work for that class by the next day. A week later, my application to graduate was accepted, and that advisor was very careful around me after that, until I graduated on time. The school learned something important about me that week. I'm super easygoing. Until you wrong me, then I will make sure I go full scorched earth on your butt until you do what's right. Moral of the story, kids, is don't trust authority figures just because they say you should. Story 68. Never wanted to actually quit, but I had a rage-inducing interaction with a professor and a pretty intense final once. The final was a project for our low-level programming course to write a microcontroller for a CPU. We were told very explicitly and clearly that we could write the program with one of 2 goals in mind, and that we would be judged against whatever goal we chose. 1. Speed. Try to write a microcontroller that takes the minimum number of steps averaged across all computations. This meant more lines of code but quicker performance. 2. Space. Try to write the smallest microcontroller that you can in terms of memory or lines of code. This will take longer to run overall but is stored more compactly on your medium of choice. So my partner and I went for the smallest program we could write. It was grueling, but we did indeed write a very small microcontroller. Statistics had been kept on the fastest and smallest final projects for the past 17 years of this class. The professor was tenured, and ours was the 2nd smallest completely correct program that had ever been evaluated in the nearly 2-decade history of it. But our grade? B-. The reason? Our microcontroller wasn't fast enough compared to the rest of the class, who all went for speed. I visited him afterwards to try and understand his completely arbitrary grading criteria, and I'm convinced he just really disliked me and my partner because we happened to be athletes at the time. He always made lame jabs about the fact that during class, and there's no other excuse I can think of for throwing a wrench like that into how he judged our program. Story 69. Wrote a 13-page paper for an education class that almost got me kicked out of school. The professor was a huge female dog that was the most sexist woman I had ever met. Anytime any of us boys asked a question or tried to participate at all, she'd be dismissive and rude. Anytime a girl would do something, they got the highest of praise or coddled along. I figured, whatever, I can just deal with this for a semester. I just need to pass the class and move on. until she reported me to the dean for plagiarism. I spent more time on this paper than I had on anything else so far in the year in any class. I cited every single quote, study, graph perfectly on the page. I put an hour in on just making sure that page was perfect, but because I didn't put quotation marks around a graph I used, she dinged me for plagiarism. The graph had the source on it, and I linked to both the web page and the image URL it was found on, and even referenced it in my paragraph right after it. The only problem was the lack of quotation marks around a picture. She made me come in for a meeting after class and told me what happened and that she was reporting it to the dean. If found guilty, I would have been disciplined up to getting kicked out. Even worse, she showed me the B I would have gotten had I not messed up. I'll never forget the phrase she used when she tells me about it. I know you weren't trying to pull the wool over my eyes, but you didn't use quotations properly. She knew I didn't do anything wrong on purpose, but still went out of her way to try and F me over. The dean said there was no issue, but she still gave me a 0 on the paper because of it. That was my last semester at that school. I transferred to a cheaper school and decided I didn't want to be a teacher anymore. Story 70. Another crappy experience courtesy of York University. I broke my arm and hand. The hand I used to write. So I was given the opportunity to write the exam on computer in the secure exam computer lab, where there are personal proctors, private rooms, and several cameras in each student's exam room observing everything. The computer was just an old school Windows computer with only Microsoft Word. I also was given accommodations, including extra time in light of my medical circumstance. While I was writing, per their instructions, I saved multiple times to ensure my work didn't get lost. Eventually, I am virtually finished the test with about an hour left on the clock. Turns out I didn't need all the extra time they gave me, and boom, the power goes out. Computer shuts off, lights go off. When I boot the computer back up, all my work is gone. When I ask them to give the same amount of time to start from the beginning, they refuse. They tell me that they cannot do that and that I have no choice but to try and finish the entire 3-hour exam in the hour I had remaining. I freak out and try to reason with them, and they tell me, too bad. So I try to rush through the test to finish the thing, and boom, power goes out again, and I lose everything for a second time. I start screaming loudly, and everyone is staring at me. I tell them it's effing outrageous that they wouldn't let me finish. It wasn't my fault, but they acted like it was when they informed my teacher. They told my teacher that it was my fault because they claimed I didn't save my document, which was, of course, a bull crap lie. My teacher eventually decided that regardless of what happened, she'd weight another previous assignment heavier, and the exam wouldn't be worth anything. Meanwhile, I had studied for weeks for that test, and I knew all the answers on the test completely, hence why I finished early. I was certain my exam would be graded over 90%. Too long, didn't read. Had broken arm/hand, wrote final exam in computer lab. Mid-exam, saved like I was told to, followed their instructions exactly. Finished with an hour on the clock. Then there was a blackout. Lost all my work, had to start again and wasn't given extra time. Was forced to write it again with the only hour I had left. Started writing again after yelling at them, saved like I was supposed to, then boom, another blackout, lost everything again. Lost a potential 90% on the exam that had the exact same questions I had studied on it. Exam weight was put on an assignment I didn't do that well on. Brought my average down, and I didn't get the A I deserved because of the stupid event, and there was no way that this was my fault. I want to say this loudly and for the record. F York University and their bullcrap policies to any future student considering going there. Don't! Save your money and avoid this place like the plague. It's a waste of money, and you won't learn nearly as much as you could at any other school. Avoid, 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 avoid! Something tells me he doesn't like York University. And rightly so. Story 71. I was taking a statistics class my second to last semester, and granted, I wasn't the best student. I would come to pretty much every lecture and discussion section, but I also worked nights, so sometimes I would nod off. But either way, I was getting at least 90% on every single one of the discussion section quizzes and no less than 83% on the exams. My grandmother was sick the entire semester, and when I did have to miss a discussion section to visit her, I made sure to tell my professor what happened so that she would know that I wasn't skipping just to skip. She ends up passing away 2 days before the final, and I find out the day before. I email my professor asking for an extra couple days to collect myself. My grandma lived with my family for my entire life. She was basically my third parent. My professor told me that I needed an original death certificate, not a copy of one, before she would even let me take the exam, and I needed to have it within the next 3 days. I understand needing some form of proof before you grade the exam, but this woman wouldn't even let me take it at all if I couldn't get her the death certificate within 3 days. My mom was devastated, and the last thing I wanted to do was pester her over this. But I got the death certificate at the last minute, and my professor spends a good 5 minutes examining it and then asks why my grandmother doesn't have the same last name as me. So I have to explain that not every grandmother is the father's mother. I take the exam, get around a 77 or something, and end up with a C or a C plus in the class because my attendance wasn't stellar. Story 72. My aunt died. I had to go home from New Jersey from Stanford for 2 weeks to move my hoarder mom out of aunt's house and then plan my aunt's funeral. I came back during finals, miraculously got through a final paper and took 2 exams. Last professor would only give me a 12-hour extension on a 15-page paper that I hadn't even started if I could deliver my aunt's death certificate and my mother's social security card in the exam as proof, violating our school's code of conduct, by the way. I obviously couldn't produce that in 12 hours. He gives me a D-. My previous average was a 95 and says to retake next year to replace the grade. I take it the following year, 4 weeks into a 10-week quarter, and I'm informed that because he made an incredibly trivial change to class format, changed lectures to Tuesdays and seminars to Thursdays, the course number had actually been changed, so my retaking wouldn't replace the grade. This also put me below the number of units required for the quarter, so I was forced to withdraw for the quarter. Because I withdrew, I didn't receive financial aid, but still had to pay $10K in partial tuition for the time I did attend lectures. I blew up at the admin, bells and whistles and everything. After months of aggravation, a committee was formed to hear my case. They wanted to let me write a final research paper and have my original grade changed, but registrar wouldn't let the grade be changed more than a year after the fact. Finally, I receive a call that it had been worked out. I'm to write a 30-page research paper in lieu of missed work and my grade would be changed. I labored over this paper to make absolutely sure I got an A to make all this BS worth it. I hand it in. Professor likes my paper, says he's changing my grade. I got a message from registrar. They decided to not allow the grades change to go through. Committee rep denies she ever told me they had it worked out with the registrar until I show her the email. I went to the dean for weeks before he'd sit down and go over everything with me. He agreed. It was all left. Interdepartmental legal conversations were being had until people just stopped responding to me. It was never resolved. I brought it as high up the chain as I knew how. I was out 4 months of my life, 10K, and my GPA was tanked. Story 73. I was in molecular biology and I had a lab I didn't prepare for, but I had 2.5 hours until it started. So I went to the library to finish the pre-lab assignments. But the pre-lab assignment said to take 2 DNA sequences that are over 250 characters and transcribe the different proteins in that sequence. This meant take the first 3 letters and find out what protein it is and make a list of the different proteins. So there were over 500 proteins to find, and this took me the entire 2.5 hours to do, but still didn't finish. Then I get the lab nervous because I didn't finish. I was already behind in the class and my instructor was a really tough grader. So I sit down and the entire class didn't do a pre-lab. And we were all really confused why we would have to do this. In lab, we were going to learn a program that will do this for you. I show my instructor that I did it and she gives me the, "You are so stupid," and takes my work and tapes it to the whiteboard and says to the class that this is not what we were supposed to do, even though that is exactly what the instructions said to do. Story 74. The toxicology module on the forensic science curriculum is an amalgamation of students from forensics, chemistry, and biology. And every year for the past 3 years, I've had the displeasure of encountering the most supercilious chemistry students who perceive people studying forensics as inferior because they assume toxicology is their territory. They also like to be domineering. They've established a hierarchy within the lab. We have designated seats like high schoolers now due to the chemistry students revolting. And my professor complies with every obscene demand, always accommodating, always obsequious to his chemistry darlings. He's lacking impartiality because it's his primary faculty and his prejudice is just so gratuitous. It's like being taught by a very intelligent but infuriatingly fickle teenager. Thankfully, this is my last year before I graduate. I guess it is quite frivolous in comparison to some injustices students endure, but I'm paying my extortionate amount of money for a master's degree whilst tolerating playground conduct from a professor and fellow students. I think a little mutual respect and dignity isn't too much to ask. Story 75. I had a professor lose a piece of work I'd done in my first year of university. He was insistent that I hadn't handed it in and that I was at fault. Ergo, I would lose a huge chunk out of my final grade. To make matters worse, my laptop had completely bricked itself a few months earlier and I'd lost a bunch of files, including that work. So I basically thought I was effed. I went and argued my case, and he basically gave me a week to produce proof. And after a week of searching, practically turning my room on its head, going to my parents, turning their house upside down in case there was something there, I managed to find a signed receipt from him saying that I'd handed in that piece of work. So he had to admit that. Yes! He had lost my work and ended up giving me a passing grade for it. Granted, it was like the lowest possible pass, but it was better than having a big fat 0 for that part of the grade. The day before I found the receipt, though, I was less in a rage quit mood and more just accepted that, yeah, I was going to have to drop out, get a job, and move on with my life. Kinda went into a weird tranquility. Anyway, I ended up having to drop out in the tail end of my last year anyway. Turned out my student loan hadn't paid out, so the university waited until I'd done my exams, then said, $6,000 please, or we won't mark your exams. And considering I was working a weekend job earning $200-ish a month, I couldn't produce said money. That was a much ragier quit. Story 76. I had a counselor for my main chunk of credits and one for my specific major. In my senior year, I made an appointment with both of them just to double check that I'd met all the requirements to graduate. I checked this myself, and there was an official review before I received my all-clear email stating that I could graduate. About a week before the ceremony, I was informed that a further review determined I was 2 classes shy and would not be graduating this semester. I had family that had already arrived and had put time and money into seeing me graduate. I complained to the school and was told, "Your education is your responsibility," and was basically told to shove it. I complained to the department head and the dean, and eventually I was allowed to attend the ceremony, but still had to take the classes later. On top of that, I graduated with a 3.9 GPA, but they didn't seem to have a record of that at the ceremony, and I was denied graduating with honors. After the following semester, I was offered a spot at the next ceremony with proper regalia, but I declined and just had them mail the diploma. I wasn't about to attend another cluster. When I start my master's program, it will be with a different school. Story 77. This will probably get buried, but this happened recently and I'm still fuming. I had a put-together thing of several classes and an internship during the course of this. I attended 2 seminars for 14 weeks each, prepared presentations in both, did a 5-week internship at school which included preparing and teaching 5 plus 90-minute classes, wrote 15 pages about my experience in said internship, prepared and held one 45-minute class in a different school, wrote 10 pages about that class, and had an half-hour oral exam. Of these things, the only thing I got graded for was the oral exam, which is horrific and unfair as is. The worst of it was held by both instructors of the seminars, and one of them in the seminar had already had the tendency to ask these really vague questions that would sort of linger in the room like a protracted fart while the 7 students in the class would try to figure out what she meant and eventually just bullcrap something or wait for her to change the subject. The same thing happened in the oral. She asked questions using words I'd never heard in the class. She asked for a lesson plan, a term she had never previously used and which I interpreted as meaning a concrete plan for a lesson. She meant, "Tell me about potential lesson plans to include children with disabilities." If I had known what she meant, I would have been able to answer the question, but despite asking her to rephrase several times, I just didn't get it. The grade wasn't awful, but because it counts for 11 effing credits, I wish it were better. Story 78. I had a logic professor that dressed like Colonel Sanders, looked like he belonged in the Old South, and spent every class talking about women's rights issues while hitting on the girls in class. I had an English professor that was a short, fat, ugly pug of a woman who spent every class talking about racism, slavery, and bashing men. I had another professor that walked into class, started writing on the board, gave his lecture without looking at the class, and left. And that was when he bothered to show up. The teacher's aides did everything else. Book sales and buybacks where they charge you 10 times what a book should cost, then tell you every book you have to sell is not being used again, but you find it in the bookstore for full price the next semester. Professors that give a failing grade even though you did everything right because they don't agree with your point of view. And that's just from where I went. As a parent that had 2 kids in college, I could get into the financial fraud and I need to stop it here. Story 79. In my genetics class, we were allowed to review old exams in lab for a week before the final exam, but we couldn't take them out of the room. I went in on a Tuesday and then went back the next day to continue. I give my GA my name and she says she can't find my exam. I ask her to search another lab section's pile just in case it had been replaced. She starts yelling about how she knows I stole it and she's going to get me expelled for cheating. 0 to 100 type crap. She calls in the actual professor and tells him I stole my exam before I could even get a word in. First thing he says is, Well, that's a good way to get kicked out of school. At this point, I'm so upset that I start yelling at both of them, and a few people also try to come to my defense. He tells me to shut up and sit down, or I'm going to make this worse for myself. Finally, I convinced him to check all the other lab section exam piles. It was in there. They both looked at me, tears running down my red face, and said, "Here you go. Now get back to studying." I slammed all my crap down and walked out. I couldn't be in there for another second. So F you, Dr. H. Story 80. Short answer, the 3 strikes that happened over the course of my university career. Each one upset me more and more, but this one is the most entertaining read, I think. The first one was probably the closest I came to leaving. The minor workers at the U went on strike. The CAF people, custodians, maintenance workers, etc. They stopped working as a part of their strike. It started at the very top of the year too, so it was still insanely hot out. They were in negotiations with the administration all summer, for months, but decided that they'd wait until the year started to drop everything. Most people assume it was so they could inconvenience as many as possible to prove to the administration how important they are to the institution. Anyways, all of a sudden, the air conditioning unit stops working in one building. Then another, then another, then another. There was suspicion that the maintenance workers were purposefully breaking them or shutting them off, though no one had any real proof. So while I was sitting in class during the 3rd week of the semester, our professor actually swayed a little bit and almost collapsed from being too hot. He promptly canceled class and a few students took him outside to sit him in some shade with some water. There were a few stories of this also happening with students in classes passing out, getting dehydrated, etc. By the next class, the weather got a bit better, but that's when the musical instruments came in. The union that was on strike decided to sit the center of the campus with tubas, trumpets, and drums and just make a crap ton of noise at 9 a.m. Like grade school band type noise. I was in the same class as before and the professor just started to laugh and let us go 30 minutes early because he couldn't teach over the noise. We were the building right beside them with all of our windows facing them. Later that week, they got megaphones and started chanting barely audible slogans with their crappy marching band. This became a daily ritual. The union wanted the support of the students, but all they did was upset us more and more and the professors, not even the people they were at odds with. Students and some professors would take the long way around where they were set up and just ignore them while walking past. I'm all for freedom of speech and freedom of assembly, but this is some kindergarten level crap. This crap was going on for about 5 or 6 weeks if I remember correctly. A sizable amount of students just stopped going to class because there wasn't any point in going if they couldn't learn anything. I don't remember how the negotiations turned out, and I don't really care. I'm just glad they stopped. Story 81. I transferred universities, so my new school accepted my college writing 2 requirement, but not my college writing 1 requirement. So this semester, I have to take a prereq for a class I already got an A in. This is a class for first semester freshmen, and the professor just preached about how great being a Democrat was every class. Assignments on how awesome BLM is, required to write papers about gun control, etc. This is fine, I don't really listen anyway, and she feels like she's shaping the youth of America or whatever. I don't know, I don't care. We get our grades back for the first essay. I got a 55. I found my graded rubric online and she took half/all of my points off in any way she could. One of the requirements for 5 points was saved paper as last name paper 1, and I received a 0. I did it, and I knew it was probably some kind of personal thing since I made it pretty obvious in class discussions I didn't care. I talked to some classmates, one of which has an English teacher as a mom, but he got the same grade I did. I could appeal to the dean, but I have 3 more essays to write in the class. Story 82. My university is ran by effing morons. I was thinking about college compared to work. So imagine if work was divided up by semesters, but each semester requires you to re-verify all of your banking information, prove you have the right to work in the US, and update and resubmit your resume. Also, the HR processing team is ran by 18-year-old interns too dumb to process it all correctly the first time. Also, you don't get paid until these morons do their job, which can take anywhere from 1 to 8 weeks. This is what it is like submitting for financial aid and registration every single semester. Every single semester, it is effed up and delayed by the arcane bureaucracy and incompetence of the university. Imagine if the private sector was like this. Also, the workplace is 70% female, and all of your bosses go on and on about how evil white people are. Men and capitalism are also just as bad. I did not really enjoy my time in college. Story 83. I did rage quit. I spent my last last year abroad at a much more rigorous university. Before we left, we were told that all of our credits would transfer and which classes to take. I returned and they say that they can't take a few of the classes. It would have added a semester of school in a city 9 hours away from my home and a new career. The university work I did got me a job without a degree. I said, F this crap, and quit with 2 classes to complete my BA. Universities are rated by their completion rate. So a few years later, I get a call from the dean of my college, and it goes like this. Hey, we were looking at your file and noticed you never graduated. Why not? I didn't graduate because the former dean was an effing a-hole and wouldn't make good on his promise. I have the transcripts of students that were studying with me overseas, and they were given credit for the classes in question. The previous dean wouldn't even have the conversation with me. Well, that doesn't seem right. Let's fix that. Got my degree in the mail. Went on to get a master's. A way easier task. Story 84. I had a brand new professor my senior year of college for a pretty easy course. Some sort of public speaking class, essentially. My roommate and I were in the same class and had very high grades. She was always after us for some reason, but we basically ignored it all semester. Our entire class noticed and always wondered why she was so insulting towards us, but we didn't mind. We had good grades. On the day of the final, my car broke down on the way to class, so we were both about 10 minutes late. She refused to hand out the final until we got there and had multiple people call our cell phones. We answered every call and could hear her in the background. She stood in front of our class saying nasty things and insulting us while we were on the way. Another teacher overheard her in the hallway and reported her. We went to our advisor straight after the final to tell her how she was acting. She informed us when we got there that some of our classmates and a teacher who overheard had already reported it. She was gone the next semester, and I got an A in the class. Story 85. I went to one semester at a community college and decided to take a class in C++. Long story short, the entire class was made up of only 10 grades, 10 projects that were to be submitted in one compressed file. The teacher based the entire grade on the output of a script he wrote, so it was either 100 or 0. After submitting my 4th project, he posted the grades for the first 3, all zeros. This came as a big surprise as my father is a software engineer at NASA who looked it over and everything before I submitted it. After emailing the teacher, he told me that he wanted one file with 3 zip files in it. After showing him how I took his verbiage to mean something different, he sent me an email with 60 font red and underlined showing how the verbiage was supposed to be taken, and it's just too bad that I need to read directions more carefully and that I couldn't resubmit any of them, so staring down a 60 as best I got the dean involved. I ended up with 100 in the class and the hatred of the entire department. 0 out of 10 wouldn't go back. Story 86. I had an ethics class where the teacher told me I didn't know what I was talking about in front of the whole class. She said she wanted to ask a combat veteran a question, and I wasn't the only veteran in the room, but I was apparently the only one who had deployed to a combat zone. She asked me what would happen if my commander demanded that I shoot some unarmed kids in order to capture a hill. Not sure she's aware that this isn't gentleman's warfare like before the American Revolution, and I said, you have a duty to disobey immoral and unlawful orders. She told me I didn't know what I was talking about in front of everyone and suggested what would actually happen is your squad mates would shoot you in the back. Then a few weeks later, the VA screwed up my prescription and kept me off my antidepressants and a medicine to help with nightmares. So I started missing class due to literally not being able to sleep more than an hour a night and not trusting myself to drive to class like that. I had a meeting with her and told her that this is what's causing me to miss class or seem so disconnected when I was there. I explained that I had been in Afghanistan in 2012 and 2013 and had been diagnosed with PTSD and depressive disorder. She laughed at me and told me thinking I could have a career is unrealistic. I don't even know it. All I can do is sigh. Story 87. I took a film appreciation class. I got an F on the midterm because the professor disagreed with my interpretation. I talked to him about it during office hours and we came to an agreement that if I didn't drop the class and kept showing up and participating, he would not give me less than a B and revise my midterm grade. He gave me a D-. I had not had less than a B+ throughout college, and this effer gave me a D- on an elective class? Luckily for him, I didn't get the grade until a week or whatever days before graduation. Then that effer was one of the people saying names for commencement and was chit-chatting over the other guys saying names like Guy 1, Mike Adams. This F, Mark Adamson. Guy 1, Nick Anderson. This effing guy talking over Guy 1. It's so great to see you. This guy gets 2001 like no one else. This F, Haley Balboa. I hope that Effer is dead. He probably is. As a total aside, I had a professor who survived polio and was kind of in the same state as Hawking. Every semester, he would tell the story about probabilities using himself as the example. When I was a baby and had polio, the doctors told my mom I would die, or at best be stuck in a wheelchair and have severely limited mobility. Well, spinning in his wheelchair, we showed that doctor. That guy is effing awesome. Story 88. Not me, but a friend of mine worked at the receptionist office for the biology department at my old campus. It was nearing the end of semester when a student came in claiming that the system was showing all of his classes got dropped and the professors wouldn't let him back into the classroom. Now, this kid was well known in the department, 4.0 GPA, on the dean's list. Super smart and nice guy. This was his third year in college and he was currently taking some hardcore advanced placement bioengineering classes, and he was acing each one. They spent hours looking at the system and his profile, but nothing. It was a clean dropout authorized by him, and it was past the appeal deadline in the semester. They asked him, "Are you sure there's nobody else who has access to your student account?" He said, "My girlfriend, but we broke up a month ago." He had a horrible look of sudden realization on his face and booked it out of the office. Story 89. Oh man, where do I even start? When I asked if I could trade out frivolous elective classes for major specific courses for my bachelor's degree to get the most out of my tuition, i.e. wanting to take Psych 300, 400 level classes instead of Astronomy 101 and 102, and being told that isn't acceptable, when I'd see my tuition go up each and every semester despite being afforded no new perks of any kind, at the start of every semester when textbooks cost me an extra $1,500, even though I'd only use them 4 to 5 times a semester for the included quizzes / digitally locked content CD that came with it. When I found out that the athletes are assigned personal and private tutors that don't have to attend class, are given preemptive practice quizzes and tests, the chance to do retakes, you know, all the crap normal students don't get. When the school that cost me $25 grand a year to attend is taught almost exclusively by TAs who are roughly 3 to 7 years older than me, pursuing their master's or doctoral degrees, while the tenured professors do F all for teaching and make 3 times as much to carry out experiments and for-profit research for the school. When doing homework / take-home assignments, being told not to talk to fellow classmates, use the internet, or anything other than the textbook. Why the F would I ever deliberately ignore accessible reference material? What professional environment has ever said, "No, you figure out the problem on your own and alone, or you're fired"? It was the single most ridiculous rule I have ever heard and actively anti-professional. Everything about college is such an effing scam. Story 90. Had a course. Capitalism Appreciation. Okay, it was actually called Financial Decisions in Your Life. The professor scanned a bunch of bank brochures, posted them to the online syllabus, and told us that we had to purchase it off him as that was the textbook. We talked about it and the class decided, F that noise. We went to the dean and caused a ruckus. First off, the syllabus contains other information, such as dates, contact information, etc. Second, there's a direct conflict of interest, forcing people to buy your book. In another class, the professor handed out copies of his book and asked us if we were okay purchasing it. He coil-bound and printed it himself to bring costs down, and it was a fantastic book. We all bought it. So the dean said he couldn't force us to buy the book, so he said that he was going to change the course to remote learning if we bought the book. Everyone bought it, except for me. Every Wednesday morning at 8 a.m., the professor would drive an hour in rush hour traffic to teach a class of 1. Me. That lasted 3 weeks until he finally gave me the password and let me use the book for free. I told nobody because they all caved in and can suck it. Hey, the holdout victory wins in the end. Guys, that is the end of all our fascinating, problematic stories from college. If you have some of your own, feel free to comment them down below, and we can all share in our pains together.